Good morning, everyone. Welcome to BAM 2021. My name is Sam Chung, and we're really excited to have you here with us today. We're at the beautiful Newdea studios here in Vancouver. We're so excited to be working with this company. They've been fantastic. Did you guys know that we are in a pandemic? It's a different world today. And one fact that really stood out to me was, did you guys know that a panda bear eats for 12 hours a day? And that's why they call this a pandemic, because we've been eating for 12 hours a day during this time. How many people have put on 5 pounds? Show of hands. 10 pounds? 15? I'm at 15 personally, so I don't know where you guys are. Guys, to kick off today's conference, we're super excited to have Dr. Santa Ono with us. Dr. Ono has really done everything. He's the president of the University of BC. He has been president of the University of Cincinnati, senior vice provost and deputy provost of Emory University, and he's taught at a couple lesser-known schools like Johns Hopkins, Harvard University, and the University of College London. You know, you probably never heard of them, but we're very excited to have him opening our conference today.
On behalf of the organizers, I'd like to thank you all for taking time from your busy day to learn and think about the importance of business and the marketplace and its role Christians can play in affirming that all work is meaningful and part of God's plan.
What?
See, we can't all be missionaries,
a little
pastors, full-time ministry workers. Some of us have callings and gifts for business. Some of us are called to be university presidents. Others to be social entrepreneurs or impact investors. Here are some examples of what we can do. Help with the Great Commission, shining light in the world. Help with social justice or healing the planet to provide gainful employment. Help the next generation reach their own generation, move away from their dualism of ideas that full-time ministry is only for missionaries and pastors. It's actually for all of us. And for young people and students participating in the conference today, we're happy to have students who are looking toward their future calling, as you need to reach your peers so that they can make a difference for the kingdom. We also want to affirm entrepreneurs and business people. You see, it's more than a job. It's also a calling.
Guys,
it's your mission.
There's a big echo in here, and I can barely hear it.
Poverty. Give them hope for a future. Give them life, and hopefully life everlasting. The speakers you will hear from today are top of their game. They're not just teaching it, they're living it. They're making their way in the marketplace to be good salt and light.
That's Tunehag.
I'd like to remind students that you might be thinking about your career and directions after graduation. That might include feeding your entrepreneurial creativity and thinking about how to make a difference. For those of you already in the working world, you're already shaping your direction for how to incarnate Christ amongst your co-workers. I believe that there is much to be learned today. See, it's all about connecting with friends and mentors. Breakout sessions allow you to connect with speakers and your affinity groups so that you'll make new friends today. Don't hesitate to reach out and to connect. Thanks again for joining us today, and we look forward to being stretched and challenged to be salt and light in the darkness, to use our talents and abilities to join other Christian business and entrepreneurial leaders on the journey of vocation and calling. That is what our journey of life and what marketplace theology is all about. I pray that you'll be blessed by today's proceedings. Thank you. Dear Heavenly Father, we pray for all that are here today. We pray for wisdom. We pray for friendship and mentorship as they embark on their journeys to make a difference as salt and light in the lives of others. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ono. It's such a pleasure to have you speaking with us today. And for those of you who haven't heard Dr. Ono speak, it's amazing. He shares the most incredible stories. So for a little bit of housekeeping, we ask that you keep your chat box on mute. And also, we ask that you keep an eye on the chat box on the side. We're going to be doing a lot of giveaways today. The first giveaway goes to David Sickles. He was the first person to log in, and we are going to be giving you a Just Tea prize package. Keep your eye on the chat box, and also keep your eye on that reactions button that's at the bottom of your screen. So we're going to be doing a lot of Q&As today where you get to meet with the speakers one-on-one. You get to ask them questions live. So if you want to ask them a question live, just go to the reactions button and raise your hand. If you don't feel like speaking, you can add your question into the chat box on the side. So let's start with our first speaker. We have Mats Tunehag from Sweden. It's such a pleasure to have him. He's the chairman of BAM Global. Mats has worked in over half of the countries in the world. And he also serves part-time in the Global Investment Fund, which is based on Christian values to help small and medium enterprises get funding and business direction. He's being interviewed today by Teng, who is a good friend of ours. Tara is Miss Canada 2012 and Miss World Canada 2013.
Okay. Mats, thank you so much for spending some time with us. Welcome to Vancouver.
Thank you, Tara.
Have you been to Vancouver before?
I have. It's a beautiful city. Yes, indeed.
Oh, great. Well, I wish we could be here in person, but obviously that's not possible right now. So this is our next best thing.
Okay.
I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about who you are.
Well, I was born and raised in Sweden, and like you, Tara, yeah, my dad was a pastor.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked internationally basically all my adult life. And I guess I'm a little bit entrepreneurial, started a number of things, a few dozen organizations here and there across the globe. Last 5 years or so, my wife and I had two bases, which resonate with you too, Sweden and Singapore. And we really love Singapore. And of course, when we're recording this, it's Chinese New Year. And so that's a special thing, especially in Singapore. My wife is American from Alaska. So and she's an expert on human trafficking issues. And she's very entrepreneurial. She started an organization in Greece, and then a pan-European organization with a few hundred organizations in 50 countries working together. And then thirdly, a global trade association of 100 plus businesses fighting human trafficking. So, and her name is Jennifer. So sometimes we work together on like business solution, business as mission stuff for fighting human trafficking. And my title, which I tend to forget, but I'm the chairman of BAM Global, BAM standing for Business as Mission.
That's great. Well, so much of what you said resonated with me personally, and I'm sure it's going to resonate with everybody in our audience who's going to be watching this. So we're so excited to get into what you have to share with us. But first, when you're not doing BAM, Business as Mission, what do you enjoy doing?
Cooking.
Oh.
I love cooking.
What would you cook?
I do mainly sort of European, French, Swedish. My wife does more of Asian cuisine. So now we're doing, of course, some Chinese things like the yusheng, which Singaporeans would know what that is. Today we had steamboat yesterday. So, and to me, I love, for me, cooking is part of a composing. So that I don't like shopping apart from grocery and wine shopping, because that's part of composing a meal. And
okay.
Thinking through, a 3-course meal and decorating, thinking theme and stuff. I really enjoy cooking. And then reading, you may detect some books. This is not the library. This is the dining room.
Well, I can't wait to see the dining room, the library. Then one day we'll all come over for dinner and we'll all have great conversation in the library.
Absolutely. So you get about 7,000 books to choose from. So Well, come over. And then the third thing that I love doing is walking in nature, enjoying silence and solitude.
Lovely. Well, we have lots of that here in Vancouver. Not always
Yeah.
the solitude, but certainly the nature.
Yes, true.
So tell us, how did you get involved with Business's mission with BAM?
Yeah, good question. And of course, there are several contributing factors, but let me mention two sort of pivotal events that really catalyzed me into this. I was involved in the Soviet Union while there was still a Soviet Union. And of course, when the Soviet Union collapsed December 91, one country became 15 countries, one currency, 15 currencies. And during the communist times, everybody had a job.
Right.
Not necessarily meaningful or productive. But after that, unemployment and underemployment skyrocketed exponentially, 30, 50, 70%. And being involved in, especially in the stans, in the Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and so forth,
Right.
I just saw how this was fairly devastating. How can we as Christians meet these needs? What does it mean? What are good news for people who are unemployed? Because with unemployment comes all kinds of issues like labor migration, human trafficking, domestic violence, drug issues, and all that. So I started then in the 90s, mid-90s, a process, and that led to the Central Asia Business as Mission consultation. And then I got invited to other countries and continents. Could you set up something similar? And then I thought, well, maybe I should start a global think tank on this topic. So I did. The second thing that was important, this was more conceptual, but very, very important, was Rwanda, the Central African country. And in 94, in spring of 94, of course, it was the genocide, about 1 million people killed within 3 months. And Rwanda was of course one of the ultimate success stories in the history of the church and missions. In less than 100 years, it went from 0 Christians to 90% of the population going to church, which meant that the genocide, it was Christian killing Christians. And what's wrong with this picture? And this forced me to think, how do we define success? If success is, getting people into church and church activities, not wrong per se, but if that is our sole criteria, Rwanda was it. But it was also the ultimate failure of the church. And if you combine that then with what is good news in Central Asia to the unemployed, and how can the gospel transform ethnic relations, the marketplace, business, and all that kind of stuff, and that sort of triggered me, we need to do something.
Wow. I mean, we could spend a lot of time. There's a lot you just touched on there. And those are really, really important conversations. I'm so glad that we're having this conversation. And I'm so glad that we are willing to approach these big topics with the humility to say, where did we go wrong? Right. And how can we make it better?
Right.
Yeah. So that we don't continue to repeat the cycle. So with all that in mind, what is BAM?
Right. It's an acronym for Business as Mission. And that is a term that now is in swung across the globe in English. Of course, there are 6,000 other languages. So the term is not the point. People call it different things in different languages. And it is a term. But what is important is the content. What do we mean by it? And that's what you're asking rightly. So let me share sort of 3 things that we mean when we say BAM, or Business as Mission. 1, it is a concept. And it's not a new concept. I'm not claiming it. This conference is not claiming it. We invented something new. This really goes back to, Jewish thinking, Judeo-Christian thinking, and we see throughout history that there have been deep thinking and thoughts on what is the relationship between God, people, profit, work, dignity, and all those kinds of things. So in our day and age, we've then developed a BAM global think tank, and we produced 30 different reports engaging about 400 people in 50 different nations, thinking through what is this from a biblical perspective, from a practical perspective, from an economic perspective, from a global perspective, from a strategic perspective, from a church perspective. And so we've developed then, verbalized what does that concept mean today? 4 things.
Okay, tell us.
BAM 1. It is one God, one Lord. And if Jesus is Lord, he should be Lord of everything, including my business and the marketplace. So which means I take my Sunday talk into a Monday walk.
Yes.
I connect the dots, the Sunday and the Monday, recognizing that God is Lord of Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and so. BAM 2. That is that dual dimension. Whatever we do for God and for people. And that is really following Jesus' example. He said, what you've done to the least, the lost, and the lowliest, you've done to me. Yep. We can't disconnect and say, well, I'm just going to love people, but not care about God. Or I'm going to be super spiritual, I'm loving God, but I'm not going to care about the homeless person in my neighborhood. Those are connected. So BAM is then doing business for God, with God, and for people.
Yes.
BAM 3. 3 biblical mandates, which we all have, regardless of what we do. But we are then trying to apply that into the business world. The creation mandate. God is the creator God. He created good things for himself and for others. Yeah. And after each production day, what did God do? He did quality control. He said, hey, these are good products. I like the zebra, I like the moon, and I like the Himalayas and Vancouver. I'm going to twist that very nicely. And he did. So, and we are created in his image to be creative, to create good things, products and services in business for him and for people. Yep. That's the stewardship thing of some of us have been then created to be creative in business. Some in music, some in cooking, some in writing, some in child rearing. Yeah. But that's and the second mandate is the great commandment. Love God, love your neighbor. Yeah. Again, the dual dimension. But then we ask in business, who is our neighbor? We have a lot of neighbors in business. It's that we should show practical love. Yes. It's kind of a litmus test. How do I treat my staff?
Yes.
How do I treat my customers? How do I treat my suppliers? How do I treat my competitors? How do I treat the river that runs through the town where I have my business? How do I treat the tax authorities? How do I treat the community? How do I treat the family?
Yeah.
And so that is the Great Commandment. And then the Great Commission is the third mandate, which is when Jesus is saying, and that, we are to think globally. The third mandate is the Great Commission. It's about this global thrust to all nations, to all peoples. So we're doing business, not just thinking, what can I do locally, but we're thinking also of other parts of the world, not just because we want to be exotic, but that's part of what we are called to do, because God so loved the world. Wow. And that is the whole world. So that's the third mandate. And number 4 in what is BAM is 4 bottom lines. Believing that business should have a holistic impact, that it can have a holistic impact on multiple bottom lines for multiple stakeholders, the many neighbors. So we talk about BAM being intentional in planning and operating and evaluating your business so it becomes a blessing financially, socially, environmentally, and spiritually to people. And that's the 4 bottom lines. So we say that businesses shall serve people, align with God's purposes, be good stewards of the planet, and make a profit.
Mm.
People, purpose, planet, profit. That's the 4 bottom lines. So that's the BAM concept. Then, of course, secondly, we have the BAM practice. So businesses are taking these principles and concepts and are shaping and reshaping their business accordingly. So BAM is a concept, it is a praxis, and then thirdly, it's also now a global movement. And it's not one big organization that runs everything. It is, sociologically speaking, a movement, like the abolitionist movement or the civil rights movement, or for church people, charismatic movement. It's
Right.
something that is sort of beyond any person's or organization's control. And this movement can be characterized with 3 words that all starts with poly, which is a Greek prefix for many. Polydirectional, polycentric, and polyglot. It doesn't have one center. It's polycentric. It has centers in Korea and Brazil and Indonesia and India and so forth. Polyglot, BAM exists in many, many different languages, and it's polydirectional. It's not from the west to the rest. It's from everywhere to everywhere.
That's important.
Yes. So it's not a Western thing. I mean, now we're talking Canada, and Canada has an important role to play here. But then we need to understand that there are already a lot of BAM initiatives coming from other continents.
Yes.
Yeah.
So why should people get involved in BAM?
Good question. And again, being a Westerner, I'll let me speak in bullet points, not because Jesus did, he never did, but I'll give you 3 points anyway. Why BAM? Well, God wants it. So, you know, if we want to be followers of Jesus, yeah, let's walk with him into the marketplace. Secondly, the world needs it more than ever during and post the pandemic. You know, just because of COVID, 100 million people have been thrown into absolute poverty again. And they're, you know, we're looking 10 years since the Arab Spring. That totally changed the Middle East. Well, what catalyzed that whole uprising in the Middle East? Unemployment, dysfunctions in business and the marketplace. And if you look at some of the biggest needs in the world, whether it is poverty, youth, human trafficking, unreached peoples, and we can take a number of variables, often they are related to lack of jobs.
Yeah.
The world needs it. And if we're going to be relevant as Christians, you know, how are we going to serve? And that is doing like Jesus, because Jesus never told anyone who came to him, you have the wrong kind of need. He didn't say, oh, sorry, I got a spiritual ministry, so if you're hungry, sorry, nothing I can do about that. No, he met that need and said, oh, this is the kingdom of God being manifested.
Yeah. If anything, he started with people's physical, immediate needs.
Exactly.
And then talked to them about a more spiritual conversation, but he always started with the body and the immediate needs.
Exactly. And that is the you know, what we're trying to do in BAM. How do we manifest the kingdom of God? How do we meet needs of the people, serve them, and thus also serve God? So world needs it. And then lastly, thirdly, God calls people to business. It is a holy calling. It's a ministry in its own rights. You know, so if God calls you to business, rejoice. That is your highest calling. And if God calls you to be a pastor, fine. But we need to, you know, get that going, that recognize and affirm and equip and deploy business people to service. That is business as mission.
That's great. That's really, really good. So looking forward, you know, you mentioned briefly, you know, some of the movements already that we talked about, social movements, political movements, even church movements that have happened in the past that have shaped where we are today. So looking forward, what are some of the major challenges and opportunities for BAM?
Right. Yeah, so this is macro issues, but let's and also related to, you know, movements of societal transformation. You know, one of the major challenges we still have is that whole mental paradigm shift we need to have. You know, breaking down that sacred secular divide, connecting Sunday with Monday, recognizing that business is a ministry in its own own right. So getting our thinking aligned, because BAM is not a technique, it's a worldview and a lifestyle.
Right.
And so it starts here.
Mm.
And that is one of the challenges we need to work on. The second one is, of course, business solutions. We need business solutions to environmental issues. We need business solutions to fight human trafficking. We need business solutions for all kinds of things. And this is where entrepreneurs should think, it's a God-given gift. I can solve problems with this. And then another challenge is, because the needs are so great, and we learned that from other social movements, like the civil rights movement and so forth. At some point, they form a critical mass, so they reach a tipping point. So laws are changed or behaviors are changed. And we really need to have more and more BAM initiatives in universities, in churches, in NGO organizations, in businesses, in investment groups, and so forth. So together we can form an ecosystem that can become a critical mass, so we can start seeing changes of industries, of cities, and of nations. Of course, and this is not going to happen today, but what we do today can set the stage for generations to come.
Yes. Yeah. And that's so important. It's passing the baton. So good. So how may people want to learn about BAM? Where do they go if they want to learn more about getting involved? And how can they connect with you and BAM Global? Got any tips, suggestions?
Yeah, we do have a virtual global congress late April. So check bamcongress.org. There, you can also check businessasmission.com, which is the biggest resource directory in the world when it comes to BAM material. Tunehag.com has BAM stuff in 21 languages if you want to brush up your Vietnamese or Turkish or whatever your favorite language is. Yeah, join us for the BAM Global Congress, and you can learn more, and you can connect also with the movement globally. And check the websites I mentioned.
Thank you, Mats. That was amazing. I learned so much from that, and I have to say, I'm starting to see a common theme. Dr. Ono and Mr. Tunehag both said calling. What are you called to do? How can you use that calling? We're not all good at everything. Where does your superpower lie? One thing I will say, if you are on this call this morning, please add your name to your chat box. We're going to go into breakout rooms after the next Q&A session. And it's really important for us to have your actual name so we can set you into a breakout room and the people that you'll be meeting with know who you are. So please, if your screen says, iPad or MacBook or whatever, please change it to your actual name. We have an opportunity now to speak with Mr. Tunehag. So if you have questions, please click on the reactions button in the bottom bar and you can ask him live, or you can post your question in the chat along the side of the screen. So our first question was, if we view the creation narrative through a business lens, that after God created, he did quality control, do you think we overlook the importance of rest?
Possible, but that is not just related to if you're in business or not. Part of the creation narrative and the culture of the creation mandate is, of course, is to follow that godly pace of working and resting. And the creation mandate is recognizing that God is the creator and we are created in his image, and thus also creative to create for ourselves and for others. But yeah, the pace, work and rest is a biblical thing, and we mustn't overlook that. But that doesn't, the danger of overlooking the rest doesn't nullify the biblical mandate that there is a creation mandate that we are to be creative.
Yeah, and isn't it true that we are also called to rest? I know that it's a big part of a busy week for me. I typically work a 60 to 80 hour week, and if I don't take that Sunday as a day of rest, or whatever day you choose to be a day of rest for you, I really feel overwhelmed without that time. What advice can you give, Mr. Tunehag, for people that are trying to find that balance?
I'm not sure if I'm an expert on it, but I would try to be intentional about it, have that kind of change of pace. But I think it's also important. It's not just I need to rest and rejuvenate, because that's simplifying what the Sabbath is. It is recognizing God and who God is and who we are. And so it's not just I'm going to kick back and be on the couch for a while. It is every day of the week we are doing things for God and for people, but that gives us another chance to focus on God in a different way.
Yes, absolutely. A second question is, please give us an example of a recent business that has started that embraces all 4 pillars.
Well, does it have to be recent? There are many of them. And the good news today is that today we can actually talk about thousands of BAM businesses around the globe. And there is a resort, for example, in Southeast Asia that is very intentional, both in planning and operation and in evaluation of the business, in seeing that the 4 bottom lines are included and they're having an impact. And as was mentioned in the introduction, I worked with an investment group. You can check that at the transformationalsme.org, and we've been around for about 20 years. And as we invest in businesses, Arab world and Asia, part of the due diligence process is to see how are they performing on the 4 bottom lines. And then if they get financial capital, also get intellectual capital, a mentor who follows up with them on a continuous basis on the 4 bottom lines, which goes into an annual report to the investors, so they can see how are these companies making a difference holistically. Now, there isn't a single company that has arrived, does everything right and on all 4 bottom lines, but it is the intentionality and professionality regarding these 4 bottom lines.
Yeah, and I have to say that's what I'm really happy about with this conference is no one has it all figured out. When you start in business, it's a huge void. And what I love about this conference is you get connected with people that are in the industry. You can find a mentor, and we're giving away a couple really special prizes today that deal with mentorship and guidance. So guys, stay tuned because we have some really special prizes. But that's what I love about this conference. You get to find intentional business people that are interested in helping you grow. So there was a question, you mentioned about human trafficking. I wonder how businesses solve this issue specifically.
First, we need to understand the problem. 40, 50 million, 60 million people are held as slaves today. What is a root cause to human trafficking? It is unemployment. So we can never deal with prevention, adequate prevention, without talking about creating jobs with dignity. So who creates jobs? Business people. That's the prevention side. Now, if you are to rescue people out of a trafficking situation, we need to be able to answer the following question. Out of trafficking, into what? There needs to be a job with dignity at the other end. Statistics shows that 80% of those who are rescued but don't find a job with dignity at the other end are re-trafficked. So when we talk about prevention, when we talk about restoration of the survivors of human trafficking, we're talking about jobs with dignity. So some of the most strategic keys to fight human trafficking with dignity is business. So there's a group called the Freedom Business Alliance, which is a sort of a global trade association. I was the chairman for a while. My wife was part of starting that. That 100 businesses in 30 different nations, that their sole focus is business solutions to human trafficking.
No, that's amazing. And for me personally, I have to say that really touches me. And the person asking you the questions, Tara Teng, she works to prevent human trafficking here in Vancouver as well, with the Joy Smith Foundation. So we have a question. What is the difference, if any, between the establishment of BAM initiatives and the platforms, business, community development, etc.? Missionaries need to stay, work, and minister in a creative access nation where missionaries are not allowed.
BAM is about real business and real mission. We're not promoting or advocating in any way, shape, or form fake businesses, or businesses that just go into a country to register a business, to access some visas, to do something that some people would call more spiritual. Business is a ministry in its own right. And if we're really going to serve people and meet needs and keep our integrity, if we tell our government we are here to do business, let's do business. And so, and that is very, very important. And governments find out, and neighbors find out, communities find out very quickly if you're faking a business, and you lose your credibility, you lose your testimony, and you will probably lose your visa as well. So we're not doing BAP, business as a platform for something else. No, we're doing BAM, real business, real mission.
And you know, there was a question earlier by Grayson. I don't know if someone can scroll up, but basically the question that Grayson Baines was asking is, most people say it's a calling when you go into the missionary field. It's a calling. What is it for people who are not sure what their calling is? What direction would you give someone who's looking to go out and find where they're best suited?
God calls and equips people to different things, which could be art, can be music, can be child rearing, could be, you know, all kinds of things. And we need to recognize that we're the body of Christ, different parts. Now, if somebody says, yeah, I want to do BAM, it sounds right, it sounds strategic, and that will help me to do this and that. And people come and ask me, you know, what do you think? Should I do that? My first question is always, are you passionate about business? Are you passionate about business? If not, you're gonna. It's hard, and you know that. How many hours you can put into a business? You mentioned 60 or 80 hours. You need to be passionate about it and believe this is my gift. This is my calling. And if you don't pass that first litmus test, don't pursue BAM. You will hurt yourself and possibly others.
And you know, to that end, I didn't start out in business per se. I felt like I was called to music. I sang opera for 20 years professionally before I moved into business. And then at that point, I felt called to being more intentional in this business field. A question from Natalie. Guriel, is BAM involved in any global sustainability, environmental initiatives, or partnerships? From a stance of my research, I understand sometimes sustainable certifications can reduce human trafficking.
Within BAM, we talk about, you know, 4 bottom lines. It's part of the creation mandate to be good stewards of creation. When we looked at BAM think tank through some research by Steve Randall, for example, at Biola University in California, it showed that in general, a lot of BAM businesses were quite weak on that particular bottom line. So we have put an emphasis since then in doing more BAM think tank groups and papers and reports on that particular bottom line. And more businesses are engaging in that. And we're also in some of our conversations looking how that relates to, you know, the sustainable development goals and stuff like that. But that is important. We need to, but we need to think also not just reactively. How do we recycle bottles and not pollute the air or something like that? That's sort of reactive. Oh, not bad. But there are so many environmental challenges where we need to think, how can we innovate? How can we commercialize innovations and make business out of that to actually deal with environmental challenges? And Israel as a country is a world leader on some of this stuff. And we as Christians should join that as well.
And there was a question from Aldrin, and they asked, if a church decides to go this route, how would they begin?
I often tell pastors, if they say, I want to be involved, I say, well, here's one way you as a pastor can do it. It won't cost you anything. You don't need to hire another person, set up another department. Just ask to meet with some of the business people in your church. And the first thing you're going to tell them when you ask, can we meet? I'm not going to ask you for money. I'm not going to ask you for money. Because many business people are so sick and tired of being treated as cash cows or walking ATM machines. And meet with a few business people, 4 or 5, half a dozen, whatever, and just ask them one question. How can I pray for you and your business this week? How can I pray for you and your business this week? Don't try to solve the problems, just listen to them. And another pastor I've been working with related to out of Singapore, or been based in years. He goes to business owners in his church on Mondays, and he took me with him. And he said, and we just visited his members running different businesses, and we learned about their businesses. We heard about their issues. There could be, you know, staff issues or marketing issues or cash flow issues, whatever it was, and then we just ended up in the office and we talked and then we prayed for a while. And that is something that the churches can do. And then, of course, there should be sermons on the theology of work and business.
Oh, that's amazing. And, you know, I have to say, speaking about the pastors, I've been so encouraged. I've been attending Coastal Church here in Vancouver for the last 16 years. And the lead pastor there, Pastor Dave, he meets with anyone, and he definitely wasn't coming to me for money as an opera singer. Let's you know, that's a pretty clear statement. Opera singers are not cash cows. So it was really nice though, because he would pray into your life at that moment, saying, God will direct your steps, and when you get to that point, He will continue to lead you into a spirit of servanthood. So even when you're not quite there, I would say, don't just meet with the business leaders, but meet with all those who are willing to serve. And that's what Pastor Dave and Pastor Cheryl do. They sit down with anyone, but especially those that are serving in any sort of ministry capacity. They spend time pouring into their lives. It's a really beautiful thing. Another question that we had was, why do we need a movement like BAM to encourage faith-driven entrepreneurs to live an integrated life?
If it was a given, we wouldn't be needed. But there is still a need to break down the sacred secular divide, to connect Sunday and Monday. You know, whatever we profess in church on Sundays is something that we sort of apply on Monday, wherever we are, in whatever profession and so forth. So it's definitely a need. And having been involved now in BAM for over 25 years across the globe, I still meet people that never been affirmed in their calling. Let me share a brief story to illustrate. From Tanzania, East Africa. We did a 3-day consultation. African men, women, business owners, operators, small, medium, large size businesses. At the end of the 3 days, business owner came up to me, an African guy, had been running a medium-sized business for 13 years, and he said, Mats, I always felt that I was called to business, but I was always told I was wrong. Now Now I know that I'm not wrong, but if I'm still wrong, at least I'm not the only one. So what we, and that's also what Tara and I talked about in our conversation, the need to build critical mass. We are many, but we need to be even more so we can make even a bigger difference. So there is the movement, but God has orchestrated and sort of moved that forward. And to me, it's God is on the move, and so we go with Him, go with God in the flow.
That's so true. And I think the thing that stood out most with your talk for me personally was when you said, how do you treat your employees? How do you treat the people around you, your vendors, the people that you deal with day in and day out? Because really, it's just servant leadership. We're out there to serve others and lead by example. And I would say at the company I work for, VitaCore, which is one of the sponsors of today's event, we're serving by creating PPE. And the president of our company is the most down-to-earth guy, and he really he will take any job that needs to be done. He'll mop the floors, he'll sweep up, he'll do whatever needs to be done that day, and he has truly led by example. And when you spoke about treating everyone equally, I think that's what's really making the company successful, is that when people see the example of coming from the top down, then everyone wants to be better. So for our last question for this morning for you, Mr. Tunehag, we have a question from David Sickles, who actually won our first tea prize package. With many churches around the world being very small, how are we supposed to meet with them when it is unlikely that our church has business people? Follow up, how can we meet other business people to be praying for outside of our church?
Good question. I'm not sure I can do fully justice to it. How do we meet with other church people or smaller church people? I'm not really sure what he's after.
Yeah, so I think because David must be speaking about a very small, maybe a home church or something like that, how do you then have other business people to turn to or pray for your group?
The issue is not whether it's big or small. It is becoming body conscious, the body of Christ conscious. That is recognizing the different gifts of calling and just being very pragmatic, looking at in the community around you. There's always lots of different needs, and as Tara and I talked about, Jesus met different needs. Most people that came to Jesus came with physical, social, economical needs and questions, and some emotional too. And he met those. Then, of course, there was the Nicodemus who came with a spiritual question. He was an academic. He had, kind of a metaphysical question and discussion with Jesus. And Jesus met him too, where he was at. But the vast majority who came to Jesus came with those kind of physical, social, economical related questions and needs. And it is actually the same today. 7 billion people around the globe, basically no one ever wakes up thinking, how can I be born again? Especially not if you're a Hindu, you don't want to be born again. So but there are lots of people, hundreds of millions. I mean, in Vancouver, in Sweden, where I'm at the moment, in sub-Saharan Africa, who are thinking, what am I going to do about my marriage, which is collapsing? Or now in times of the pandemic, which is a disruption for most of us in the Western world, but a disaster for many people in the poorer world. They've lost everything. How am I going to survive? How am I going to have the next meal? How can I have money to send my kids to school or to the doctor? And doing that kinds of needs assessment and move in there also with business solution and following like Jesus, and not telling anyone you have the wrong kind of need, but rather saying, how can we help? How can we serve? And as business people, we say that we want to serve in and through business. So be very practical in your church, big, small, in your community, and work with other people of goodwill. Because I'd rather work with an honest Muslim than with a crooked Christian. So, find the right people, serve together.
Amen to that. Mr. Tunehag, thank you so much for calling in. We know it's a big time difference for you to be here from Sweden. We really appreciate your time, and we're going to ask you to stick around. We get to ask Mr. Tunehag more questions later on in the day. With that in mind, we're going to move to our first breakout room. Guys, I just want to say that this is one of the most important times of the conference, because I've been doing this conference for 3 years now, and I have to say I have met some incredible business people in this breakout room. People that I still talk to today, people that I still turn to today. So make this a very intentional part of your time. We're going to go into breakout rooms, and there'll be questions that go up into the chat box that you guys can discuss as a group. We also have mentorship groups for the students that are joining us today, and those sessions will be led by the mentor. But for the professionals, there'll be questions in the chat box that you can discuss. If you don't get added immediately, please sit tight. We are working on that with you. Moving forward, we wanted to play you a short video. Typically at a live BAM conference, we have a portion of the day that's called the Eagle's Nest. And what the Eagle's Nest is we bring in 3 businesses that hope to make an impact. And we have eagles that are established business people that will review the business plans, and they raise money, $50,000, that they give to the first place winner. And one of those winners was Decent, who's running Hope International School. And we have a short video of what's happened since 2019.
Hello, my name is Decent Lefson, the Director of Extending Hope International Christian School here in Africa, Malawi. I am one of the beneficiaries of the Eagle's Nest, which was held in 2018 there in Canada at Vancouver. I want to thank God that I was able to participate and be the beneficiary of that fund. After we got the fund, we invested it in the school business, the Christian school, where we are building the character of the kids and we are giving them knowledge and the skills that they need. We started the business with only 3 teachers, but now the school, since then it has grown to over 200 kids and we have 11 teachers. And the community is happy. The kids, they're learning the skills and the knowledge that they need, that they can become the responsible citizen of the nation of Malawi. And when they grow up, they will turn this nation into a great nation. So I want to thank God for the great vision that He has given to the leadership of SC development, so that many people through this fund can get the loan that they can start the businesses that otherwise they could have never been able to access and start something. And this is changing the world. It has impacted my nation, Malawi. It has impacted my family, and many more lives will be impacted through this fund. So may God bless you, and I pray that during these difficult times of COVID, we can go through this, because our school, as I'm speaking, has been on hold because we are going through a lockdown. But I believe that after the lockdown, we'll reach more people, many parents and children, which in result, there will be a blessing to their nations and their community, and a good citizen for the world. As we are passing through this season of COVID-19, I hope you will stay strong. May God bless you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Decent. With a name like Decent, what else could you do but do amazing humanitarian work? Thank you so much for that. Moving forward, we have more giveaways, and to discuss these giveaways, we have Rob Adamovsky from the audience to share one of our giveaways.
Thanks, Sam, and thanks for doing such a wonderful job hosting. So I'm here to introduce one of the giveaways, which is sessions, I believe. Sam, how many sessions? Two sessions two 45-minute sessions with a close friend of mine, Grayson Bain. He's a wonderful business leader, entrepreneur. You know, he's been involved in nonprofits and even started some churches. But really, he started as a bike shop owner way long ago and turned that into Rocky Mountain Bicycle and another brand called Raceface. An amazing, he was at the advent of mountain biking and really had the idea of bringing bikes onto the mountain. And then he took about a 10-year period of rest, but reflection, and decided to get into social enterprise investing and started a company called Just Tea, which is a wonderful Vancouver company. But he's a great mentor. He really cares for people, and you get 45 minutes of consulting work. So I really take the opportunity to have him be in front of you, have yourself be in front of him. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rob. I think that's incredibly important, and Grayson Baines actually stole the idea from me about the mountain bikes. I was the first person. I was 6 years old, and I said to my big brother, hey, what about a 10-speed that you could ride like a BMX? I'm totally dating myself, but I'm sure Grayson had the idea divinely, but I still think it was my idea first. Okay, so watch the chat box on the side, guys, because questions are going to appear, and the first person to answer those questions will win the prize. We have another video from Jim Shopland for another giveaway. Jim is a business coach, and he has helped a lot of companies scale up and become profitable.
Are you a successful business owner that feels stuck in certain areas of your business? Hi, I'm Jim Shopland, and I help business owners and entrepreneurs just like you gain clarity on their most pressing challenges or life-changing opportunities. I help you facilitate strategic thinking in determining the best ways to achieve your goals. We then work together to break those strategies into steps or tactics, prioritize those tactics, and then help you take immediate action to achieve your success. Sound interesting? Reach out to me at shoplandhealth.ca.
Thank you so much, Jim. So we have a lot of giveaways today. Please keep your eye on the chat box and add your questions as you hear the speaker speaking so that they will be able to answer them during the question and answer time. So next up, we have David Boyd from Newdea. Now, I met Mr. Boyd this year completely unrelated to BAM. He is a gentleman and a scholar. He was the chancellor, the first chancellor of the University of the Nations. So we have a lot of educators, a lot of people that are interested in growing and building the next generation here today. His accolades are too numerous to list. He consults with governments. He works all over the world, and I'm super excited for what he has to share with us today.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I'd like to be in Vancouver, but at least we're appropriately distanced. So having been born and raised and educated in Northern California, during my college years, I met and married my college sweetheart, and after we had both graduated, we took off on an adventure for 14 months on a study program to Europe. That study program became quite extended, actually. We stayed 15 years. Never returned to California, except for periodic visits. And while in Europe, beyond raising a family, starting a community and many other projects, we were predominantly involved with students in cities like Berlin and Warsaw, Munich, and many others. The students in Berlin were primarily protesting against the government and wanting to bring down the capitalism of post-war Germany and replace it with a cooperative public model and a little less class conflict. The only problem was they didn't want the model that was actually quite visible just over the Berlin Wall in East Berlin. In contrast, there was a national movement in Poland among Catholic youth whose faith was vibrant and who felt a responsibility for their nation. They were protesting against their Stalinist overlords who were oppressing their families and communities and nation at large. Out of that movement came movements you probably have heard of, like Solidarity, born out of the same faith, who saw their role within the labor community to address these issues. Eventually, Solidarity, along with many others in the country and international influences, witnessed the collapse of that Stalinist regime, along with the Stalinist regimes throughout the Eastern Bloc, many of whom had a very similar backstory to that of Catholic Poland. Those 15 years in Europe grew to 30, 35 years as we moved from Europe to the South Pacific and Asia region, and involvement with a University of the Nations, that was focused on the developing world and an emerging generation there. Over those years that we were based in that region, particularly as we were fielding more and more students back into these countries and doing everything from planting churches to small businesses, developing healthcare clinics, planning schools, and much more. Increasing amount of my own engagement became the interface with governments in those countries. And I felt honestly more and more at home. Over time, we eventually moved to Washington, D.C., where for a decade we were involved with members of the House and Senate and diplomats throughout the city, representative and their counterparts, representative of governments across particularly sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. We met in small groups, and in those groups, many of whom were actually warring parties, most often bipartisan or opposition parties, but they were learning to resolve conflict, to how to reconcile their differences, and how to grow models of good governance and justice among the poor. During that decade, I began finding, particularly with a lot of time spent in sub-Saharan Africa, a growing generation of leaders who had studied in the West, had seen a different model, and come home to make a difference. They didn't think about government like their father did, but they came home to make a difference, and in that process, they found governments that were deeply bound in debt, desperate for foreign direct investment, functionally dependent on aid, corruption as a way of life, and governments that were awash with raw data that was unstructured, unverified, and not trusted, but was collected to check off the box for the international agencies in Washington, D.C. and Europe that would send them the next tranche of aid. These governments did not need, nor their people, did not need another war on poverty that would just produce cash. They needed a war on dependence that would help them pivot away from their codependence on that aid into a different model that would produce life and cause the nation to flourish. Most of these leaders had a desire to address the issues, but they lacked the tools, both the mindset and the technology, to lead them that direction. They needed a new way of thinking. During that season, I partnered with an individual and a company that he had helped start that was already engaged in looking to make a difference in poverty within these nations. They did that around a single elementary idea, that a good paying job is the beginning of bringing dignity to an individual and community, and in turn to a nation. Looking at the role of government over the last 70 to 100 years, you find three models that have emerged, most clearly articulated by a professor at UC Berkeley back in the 1950s named Clark Kerr. And he identified these three. One was divergence, an economic model that basically works with a rogue government who's not aligned to any particular nation. And the effects on poverty is that there is no change upward. There's only extreme poverty. You see it today in places like North Korea, Venezuela, and Zimbabwe. The second model is one called dependence, which is what we've all witnessed in much of the developing world, of countries that have massive national sovereign resources that are undeveloped, whose governments collect maybe 10% of potential business revenues, but because they don't have the systems or the trust in place, and so they live off of aid from foreign agencies. The third model is one called convergence, or economic convergence. It's where governments effectively re-engineer. They create a different environment that builds trust, or that produces trust, in which the private sector, domestically or internationally, can invest into the country and create jobs. The most definitive model of this is Singapore, which back in the 40s and 50s was dirt poor, small towns, a high percentage of people addicted to heroin, and no trust among its people, nor from those outside of Singapore. It was in that context that 12 families committed to each other and formed a covenant to address the issues of corruption and distrust and development in a radical way. They discovered this model, the application of this model of economic convergence, and over time manually made the necessary changes to where they addressed rule of law, contract security, stable monetary and tax policy, land rights, and much more. Issues that are absolutely critical to reduce the risk for the investor community to come and create jobs. It took them 30 years, but they moved in that time frame from the poorest on earth to one of the wealthiest nations on earth. Others were looking on. Taiwan and Singapore followed suit. And more recently, Dubai in the Middle East and Rwanda, post-genocide, and sub-Saharan Africa have followed suit. Each of those last two sent teams to Singapore for 5 years to study their model. And they brought it back and implemented it in their own countries and around their own model culturally. The company that I've referenced before that I partnered with is engaged today with a growing number of these governments that are looking to pivot away from aid and develop an environment that's attractive to the investor community. And basically, the company its focus is on accelerating this process of economic convergence. They do that by providing a digital maturity model, a couple of year process that works with the government and tracks with the government on a platform that where they can track each of these processes that a government needs to walk through in light of from where they are to where they want to go. Secondly, it guides the economic convergence model in each of the sectors of society, and it builds out their digital economy from every individual in the country who has their own self-secure digital ID to businesses, nonprofits, NGOs, and investors or the private sector. The government's processes are all processed on board. Data is integrated, can be shared across the platform where appropriate, and their self-sovereign data of their assets can be marketed through the platform to the investor community and nations around the world that are looking. Now, for that to happen, imagine with me a mango tree. Figuratively speaking, governments want that good fruit. But mangoes don't just automatically appear on a tree. There are 3 prerequisites at least. One is the development of a healthy, nutrient-rich soil and root system. That is the role of government. if government as a service to the rest of society will give themselves, like Singapore did and others, to building that root system that is service-oriented and that is attractive, that draws investors, they will produce fruit in time. But the root system is the beginning. The second is a strong technology, the trunk of that tree. That is what the company provides in its platform. It's called Plaza. And it's the channel through which those nutrients are fed digitally into each sector of life, from the private sector to education, healthcare, services, industries, and more. And in time, as those nutrients flow, the tree will produce the kind of fruit that the government is looking for, and the people are looking for. And that fruit looks like increased tax revenue, which is almost unheard of in most developing nations. I can identify for you nations within sub-Saharan Africa that don't collect more than 10% of available tax revenues because they don't have the systems. When in a matter of a few years, every business, every individual in that country, most of whom today use smartphones, could be accessing all government services, paying their taxes over their phone, doing business, marketing their assets. But that has to be established and put in place. So tax revenues is one thing. Ease of doing business within a country, which for most, when we first started working with one particular Southern African country, the tax requirement on businesses was at 47% and would take months and months and months to get approval. Whereas in others that have gone this direction, you can start a business in places like Rwanda in one day, and the tax rates are significantly lower. It provides that some of that fruit is an environment where entrepreneurship flourishes, where families are secure because a father or a mother has a job in which they can provide a covering and food and education or health care for their family, where education is available increasingly for children, and a generation can be raised up with the skill sets needed to develop these communities. So, since 2018 in particular, there are a set of environmental influences that have been driving this shift from aid dependency and a pivoting away from that toward economic convergence. It includes the influence of China, of grants and in particular loans that have significantly increased the debt load of most of these countries, and the demand on their sovereign assets in the soil. Second is the aid plateau in the West. Most Western governments have reached their limit or beyond their limit of debt themselves, and they have less resources available to provide aid. Third is the generation shift that's taken place. Both a generation that's emerged that is globally connected. They see there are other opportunities. Many of whom want to stay. They don't want the brain drain of moving to another country. They'd like to see a reversal in their own country. And in terms of those ages, you don't have to look very far to the future to recognize that the developing world, particularly sub-Saharan Africa, is the labor force of the future. Most of Asia and the US has a median age of around 35, 36. Europe is at 42 years. Sub-Saharan Africa is 17. They are the future market of the future. Sub-Saharan Africa contains 3 times the arable land of all the other continents put together, and 80% of it is undeveloped. It's the breadbasket of the future. But for any of those assets to be realized, government has to shift its role into being a service-oriented entity that provides an environment, for those who create jobs, namely the private sector, to do what only they can do. Finally, there is demand from the private sector internationally to invest. There's over $1.3 trillion annually waiting to be invested into these countries, and it's not because of lack of trust of who is on the ground and of the data that's provided. It takes political risk. It takes leadership within these governments who will look beyond the next election when they're no longer in power. It takes vision that reaches out to the next 15 to 20 years. And it takes allies, people like you and me, who are willing to mobilize and come alongside with subject matter expertise to walk with these governments and to see models develop that fit who they are around a set of principles that do work and that are rooted in truth. And what you're doing in creating some of these models on the ground in these countries can well be a reflection of that. Thank you for your time. Look forward to continuing the conversation in the panel later today and or one-on-one with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Boyd. That was awesome. I want to dive right into the questions because they're popping up on the screen quickly. What experiences can you share that demonstrate effective change in a country using your technology?
Earliest models are those like in Singapore, South Korea, and Taiwan. They did this over a 30-year period of time, and then followed up by Dubai and Rwanda more recently, over the last 15 to 20 years. There are 3 to 4 others right now that are at various stages of development with this, from Ghana, DRC, South Africa, Angola, and a number of others at various stages of development.
That's awesome. So recognizing the shift towards technology, how does any mission-based business take advantage of them?
There were references in the question. Kevin mentioned checking out Faith Tech, or the various ministries and business agencies were referenced by Matt's first plenary. You know, there are myriads of movements like this around the world that provide those types of avenues. We're all recognizing significant shifts in tools provided by new technology. Like, I'll just reference one. I have a friend in West Africa, a person of faith, who works in the mine extractive industry. He's Mauritanian and has been involved in the industry for a number of years. He struggles with the fact that most of the minerals that are extracted out of his region are not trusted because of how they're taken. He's in the process right now using a new technology to develop effectively an audit trail with artisanal miners from initial steps of engagement on a piece of land all the way through the refinement and sale of that product, to where an investor could see who's actually doing the mining, how much is being mined, what the process and quality of that mining is. That's a technology that's going to radically change concerns that many, particularly in the West, have about extractive industries like this. So I think it's, on a local level, I would look as a small business startup for technologies that will serve. Like in that story that I just mentioned in West Africa, I asked him last week, so how easy is it for one of those local miners to be able to track on his iPhone or whatever phone he has, this type of information or give input? He said, I was in an isolated community in Guinea last week. In that isolated community, they had 4G service, and every miner had a phone they could access. I think this shift is taking place a lot quicker than we realize. And if we'll look for them, we'll see the parallel technologies that serve the particular sector we're involved with.
That's great. So Ivy Clark has a couple questions here, and the first one is, has the economic principle of convergence been creating a larger than expected GDP gap between the developed and developing countries, particularly post 2008, 7-8 economic recession due to the U.S.?
Well, we've seen that gap grow in the U.S. and in many Western countries. Our particular motivation, the reason I'm with this particular business after years of engagement with government leaders, is that I found many of these leaders were people of faith. And it was not hard to engage with them around Jesus or around the implications of their faith and reconciliation in their family or reconciling with their political enemies. But none of them had ever considered the implications of their faith in terms of good governance or addressing sustainable answers to poverty. This company's primary goal is poverty alleviation. And when they went there, they discovered in the process, they couldn't address it by aid. There is no correlation between aid and economic development. The only answer to poverty is what people on this seminar are doing in creating jobs. It's holy. Work is sacred. And it produces a sense of dignity. And so I think where that is done, I don't know that there is a foolproof answer to Ivy's question, unless you want to impose a lot of regulation from central government entities. But I think models like those that are on this seminar today, and many more around the world, are models that will lessen that discrepancy between the haves and the haves not in most of these nations where we're involved. But I think you have to recognize this is a long-term solution. Singapore took 30 years. Rwanda has moved much quicker, much smaller nation, but has pretty much reached many of those same goals, not fully, but in 12 to 15 years since genocide. And you've got a country right now, because they've pursued with strength of leadership, rule of law, stable monetary and tax policy, land rights issues, and more. They've reached, in contrast to most other sub-Saharan countries, they're nearly oversubscribed on investments. That's radically different. And but investors will come domestically and internationally where the risk level are reduced, and out of that jobs will be created in time.
That's great, and there's a really nice tie between what you're saying and what Mr. Tunehag said, is in order to combat social injustices, you have to create jobs, because that's where you can create an impact in people's day-to-day lives, and they don't have to turn to other forms of trying to make money, and just giving money is not the same as helping people find their way through this oppression. There was a question that Ivy had asked, if you could scroll up just a little bit, but she had said, in relation to AI, robotics, labor displacing technologies being deployed that are causing the developing countries as valuable chains due to the competitive labor costs.
Yeah, there's no question new technologies will eliminate jobs in categories that we've been dependent on. I have to believe, because there are plenty of examples out there, that new arenas of jobs will be created that will address, that are to those technologies and will address communities' needs. You see, yeah.
Yeah, and she even said, like, that's not even a question. She was saying, like, in the chat, she said that's a statement more than a question. But it's something that I think we, as a business community, need to address moving forward. How do we create sustainable jobs for people that create a lasting difference? Can you just scroll up one more? Sorry. There was one question here from Chris Morris. This is exciting and important. Business and mission means justice at the local level. What a great way to upend the typical narrative that the exploitive West is continuing colonial business practices. Thank you, Chris. That's great. A question is, BAM, a counter movement to Christian charity. Did the church fall when it comes to giving handouts to developing communities?
Well, it becomes problematic where it becomes a dependency, and to where it doesn't function outside of aid. Aid can be, I don't expect aid to fully go away, but I do expect that as this job creation movement rises, there will be a lessening, whether that's because the Western agencies or Western church missions movements, et cetera, don't have as much to send, but where they're engaging in a broader expression of missions. I work with another nonprofit and chair its board that is strategically involved in East Asia and building considerable consortiums of educational institutions and addressing healthcare issues, along with direct evangelism and church planting. And they're also planting churches and energy outlets for communities that haven't had energy before. And so I think, the picture, the more integrative picture of missions is growing. And with that will come a broader expression. So there doesn't have to be competition. I think there was an earlier question about doing something like this in the context of an adversarial, or not adversarial, but an environment or governmental environment that isn't supportive of people of faith. In another sector, my wife has been involved extensively for years with abandoned children that have known trauma in significant ways. And one of her students returned to a country in Southeast Asia that had repressive controls on people of faith. And that was her motivation. She created a model, though, of childcare that was antithetical to the government model, which was no care. It was a warehouse. In the government context, well over 90% of the children were dying within 9 months. In her center, less than 1% ever died. But I talked to her one time and I said, talk to me about your relationship to the government. And she said, I made a categorical decision when I began working here. And ethnically, she was part of that country. And she said, I took a categorical decision that I would not consider the government my adversary. Because she didn't, over time, the government began looking at her model. It took 20 years. And 20 years later from her beginning, the government came to her, wanted to reform, and they wanted to use her model. Now, most of us aren't willing to wait 20 years, but I would encourage, particularly small business models that are in some of these risk environments or tougher or more repressive environments, to consider their long-term investment relationally, how they serve, what kind of models they create, how they pay their taxes, how they engage with the government, whether they consider them enemies or potential friends in relationships. That takes time. It's risky. It will cost, but it's the long-term advantages there.
And I think that one thing that really stands out in the two talks that we've heard this morning is you don't have to solve every problem. You go out there and you find an issue and you work on that, being led as for all of us that are interested in Christian business, you find an issue where you're feeling called to, where you're feeling led, and you try and make a difference there, and you deal with the challenges that come. And with that, there's a really good question. How do you deal with systematic corruption when trying to bring about development?
you know, in the context we work in with governments, we deal both with, we deal obviously with a lot of data. The company is a data company. Mm-hmm. And most governments, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa, spend tens of millions of dollars collecting data, mostly by survey. But it's raw, it's unstructured. It sits on Excel spreadsheets that are in boxes in their basement. It's primarily done to check off the bank for the World Bank for their next tranche of aid. Now, there is a shift taking place here, but on this issue, all of that data is not trusted because it's not structured and it's not verified. If it were, you'd have a different response. From the investor community in particular, there's a continuum in data called data, information, knowledge, wisdom. And the further you move down that continuum, the more trustworthy the data is. When data becomes information, it tends to expose corruption. Now, the model we work off, the platform we offer governments, is based in blockchain. It's very hard to corrupt. We also base a lot of what we're doing with monitoring and evaluation tools that are rooted in the foundation of the platform that produce in time transparency and accountability. Monitoring and evaluation doesn't produce job creation. The only thing that does that is investors who trust the data. So what we're finding is addressing this issue. Corruption is not just a single issue piece that needs to be addressed. You have to approach it from different angles. So, and I'm not going to mention specific countries, at least in this conversation, but one that we're working with directly right now. There's new leadership in the country that has taken a radical stand against corruption of past administrations and has created models out of that. But they didn't have systems in place in the country to provide a more transparent model for businesses to pay taxes. They would have if there were systems available. But we're working with another that receives yearly over $4 billion a year from the World Bank to run their government. But they have $8.5 billion in uncollected business taxes in that country because there are not systems in place. The technology, whether it's ours or someone else's, can provide those systems where those businesses can, using this tool, pay their taxes on a regular basis. And with that process, you'll see a lessening of corruption in that country over time. It will take time.
Absolutely. And with that, okay, we just have a couple minutes left for this last question. There's going to be more time to ask Mr. Boyd questions at the end. But for now, one question that's being asked is there a couple quick ideas that you can share with us, a couple businesses that you could quickly scale up and get going?
You're asking me?
Just some, like, if you could summarize in just the last minute here.
I'm just considering the audience and projects that they're involved with in these countries. I think fundamentally, if you, in your small business startup, wherever you are, consider how you are relating to government, whether that's local, just local community government, municipal government where you are, or provincial government where you are. Pursue relationships with them. Commit yourself to developing models that are transparent, that are consistent with your word, that you generate this income and you pay these taxes. And you build relationship and trust with those that are around you, just as you would with your clientele. Your clients will come back to your new business startup because they trust you as well as the product that they're buying. Do the same thing with governments around you. You'll find favor in that environment.
That's great. Thank you so much, Mr. Boyd. We really appreciate your time, and we look forward to coming back to you at the end. I know there's still lots of questions for you later on in the day. Moving forward, we have another giveaway. One of our sponsors, KCM Ministries, is giving away 2 items for free from their online store. So if you go to shop.kcmcanada.ca, you can choose any 2 items from their store for free until February 24th. Great. We're going into our second breakout room. As we go into this breakout room, I just want you guys to consider something. I grew up in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Winnipeg, I know most people make fun of it. It's cold, it's snowy. I know that, but I still loved it. And one thing that I learned from growing up in Winnipeg in the winter is you help your neighbors, especially when it starts snowing hard. And just a couple days ago when it was snowing in Vancouver, I saw one of those Save on Food delivery trucks get stuck. And it was just going up Drake Street. If you live downtown Vancouver, you know Drake Street. It's a slight incline, but it had the wrong tires. And even though it was moving slowly, it just couldn't get going. So a couple of us got together, we pushed it forward, and it got on its way. Now, I didn't have any trouble moving because I have winter tires and I have all-wheel drive. And I just want to stress the importance of meeting other Christian business people and other mentors, because it's like having winter tires on your car. It just helps you get through the muck and the mire. So really take this time in these breakout rooms to meet your colleagues, meet people in the business industry, and try and work together, get their contact information, and try and find projects that you can do together. Thank you so much. I'm really excited about this next guest speaker. Gloria Nelund is what you would call a unicorn. She's so rare. I don't know if you know the statistics, but less than 5% of CEOs in the S&P 500 are female. Less than 17% of women sit on boards, and less than 3% of women of color sit on boards as well. So to have Ms. Nelund here speaking to us, sharing about running a multi-billion-dollar fund. She's the former CEO of U.S. Private Wealth Division of Deutsche Bank, former president and CEO of Bank of America Capital Management. She's an active guest speaker and really, truly someone I'm really looking forward to hearing. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ms. Nelund.
Hi, I'm Gloria Nelund. I'm the chairman and CEO of TriLinc Global. I spent almost 30 years on Wall Street with a very successful career in the global asset management industry. And while I lived by a personal commitment to honor God in all I do, I always felt really guilty about having a career in business, especially one that I loved and that brought me significant personal rewards. So in 2005, I retired to finally be able to serve God. And after almost 3 years of what I call my wilderness journey of desperately seeking my purpose, God demonstrated actually that my job had been my very own mission field. My goal is to highlight my personal journey, describe my own personal secrets to success in navigating a career in some of the largest organizations in the world. And I plan to reveal the one book that actually has always guided all of my actions and perspectives. As I mentioned, my goal's always been to honor God in all that I do. My 3 keys to success are actually really simple. I work hard, I'm a problem solver, and I love to help people. And as a result, I've had a great career. I started out as a trust department clerk in Ohio in 1979. 12 years later, I was the CEO of a $15 billion asset management firm. And 9 years after that, I was the CEO of a $50 billion global asset management firm. And I'm often asked if I had a plan and set goals that I could achieve for my career, but I really didn't. Actually, all I did was I worked really hard, I solved problems, and I helped people. As I mentioned, I grew up in Ohio. I actually finished high school and started college at 16. And I went to school to be an elementary school teacher. Because back in the 60s and 70s, if you were a woman and you wanted to have a career and a college-based career, basically you had 2 choices. You could be a school teacher or a nurse. And I really don't like blood. So I decided, okay, I'm going to be a school teacher. My very first semester of student teaching, I came home in tears and I told my mom, look, this really isn't going to work. I just don't think I can do this. And my mom, being a great mom, said, oh, honey, it's your first day. Of course you can do this. And if you wait until the end of the semester, if you really don't want to do it, then we can talk about your options. And on my last day of student teaching, I came home much more resolved and I said, Mom, I really don't want to do this. And it won't be good for anyone. And so basically, I then was like, well, now what do I do? And fortunately, my best friend's mom worked at a bank in Ohio that had a trust and investment department. So in 1979 in Ohio, I started my very first job typing stock certificates and balancing shareholder records manually. Yes, you put a certificate into the typewriter and you actually type them. But I really loved what I did and I learned a lot about finance and I found that I just loved it. And so I always was working really hard, helping people, solving problems, and I just kept getting promoted. Ultimately, actually, in 1984, I got recruited by Security Pacific Bank to move to California. And after that, I did the same thing I'd always done. I just worked really hard. I helped people, I solved problems, and I just kept getting promoted. And again, as I mentioned, by 1991, I was the CEO of a subsidiary of Security Pacific Bank. It was an institutional asset management subsidiary. And again, I just kept doing the same thing. Then we got acquired by Bank of America. And while acquisitions are really tough on people, I really thought, well, you know what? Whatever happens is in God's hand. And so I'm going to do what I always do. I work really hard, solve problems, and help people. And lo and behold, I just kept getting promoted. And then by 1998, Nations Bank bought Bank of America. And I had decided it was probably time for me to do something different. I had always worked in large financial institutions on Wall Street. There was a lot going on in my life, and I just thought, wow, I've always wanted to do something a little entrepreneurial. This is probably the time. Well, as it turns out, because I was working hard, solving problems, and helping people, Bank of America wanted to keep me. And so I stayed on for a very short while, and then I got hired by Scudder in New York, who eventually got bought by Deutsche Bank. And so even though my goal was to get out of big banks, now I'm in one of the largest financial institutions in the world, and I was asked to be the CEO of their private wealth management division for North America. And at the time I took over, actually, we were losing $130 million a year, operating under a memo of understanding with the Fed for anti-money laundering violations. And we had all kinds of duplication of systems and entities and everything. And so my goal when I took over that role was to make it profitable. And I am thrilled to tell you that in 3.5 years, myself and my management team orchestrated the most successful turnaround ever at Deutsche Bank. And so we were rewarded well, paid a lot of money, we were given a lot of career accolades. And basically, in April of 2005, we had gotten our first quarter results and we were on target to hit our 25% profit margin. So obviously we had achieved our accomplishment. It was very exciting. So I took my management team out to the Yale Club in New York to celebrate. And after dinner, I was walking back to my apartment and I really had this moment where I thought, wow, that's it. Like, I've accomplished all of this. I've loved my career. But I really feel like I haven't made a difference in the world. And it bothered me. And so that night, I could hardly sleep. I was flying to Florida the next day to visit one of our offices. And as I was walking out the door, I saw this book that I had been on my coffee table for more than a year that my brother-in-law had given me. It was called Halftime. And so I picked it up, still troubled by this feeling I had. And on my way to Florida, I read the book and finished it on my way back. By the time I got back to New York that night, I knew what I needed to do. So I actually hopped on a flight to London, arrived the next day, and quit my job. And everybody says, "Oh, you didn't have a plan?" No, I did not have a plan. And not only did I not have a plan, it didn't occur to me until actually after I had done this and told my boss that I wanted to retire. It occurred to me that I had not talked to my husband because I didn't mention that for 6.5 years, I was commuting to New York Monday through Friday. And so my husband knew always where I was, but I had not mentioned anything that was going on. And so I called him from London and I was so nervous. I said, honey, I'm in London. And he was like, oh, I didn't know you were supposed to be in London this week. And I said, well, I'm not. Actually, it's a funny thing. And anyway, I ended up saying to him, well, honey, I quit my job. And my husband is the most amazing man in the whole world. His response was, oh, thank God. Because it had been hard on him and our son, who has Down syndrome, as I was commuting around the world and back and forth to New York. And so he thought that it would be a really good thing to have me retired. So ultimately, at the end of 2005, I retired. And that is actually what I call the beginning of my wilderness journey. So I set out thinking this was a really good thing to find my calling, because I thought, well, God must have some really big calling for me. So I joined every Bible study I could. I actually decided I really wanted to give back to the world. So I traveled around the world, giving back to, or, participating in causes I really cared about and giving back in different ways. And I joined the master's program. I did all these things thinking, okay, now my life will have meaning and God will show me my purpose. And what truly was a wilderness journey for 3 years, I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't come to what was God's purpose for me. And about a 2-week period at the end of 2007, early 2008, I had all of these people in my life reach out to me in different ways. These are people that didn't know each other, that are truly from different phases in my work life. And they'd all reached out to me to tell me what a difference I'd made in their life. And with all of that, and with a few other things that were going on, I really felt like God said to me, Gloria, business was your calling. All of those years you lived your life to honor me, and it did honor me. And so that was your calling. Fortunately, that freed me up. It took away this relief, or it gave me this relief. It took away that guilt. And I then was freed up to think about, okay, then how can I have the biggest impact that I can have on the world? And basically, in 2000, also about that same time, end of 2007, early 2008, I was invited to join this think tank discussion group in London. And the topic was, how do we use capitalism to solve social problems? Which made all the sense in the world to me. And so, while I won't bore you with the details, by the end of 2008, I decided I would start TriLinc and basically help harness the power of capitalism to solve social problems. I'd spent my whole career on Wall Street creating and managing and distributing products that were investment products that achieved a financial goal. So I knew how to do that. And my belief about business, which is what we invest in, also is that we as investors have power to influence the companies that we invest in. And so my goal with TriLinc really has been to connect investors with that power that they have, but also to create investments that prove that you don't have to give up investment return to do good. And so, as I said, I started TriLinc in 2008. Since then, we've invested about $1.4 billion, making loans to growth stage, small, mid-sized businesses in very select emerging markets. And we've created lots of positive impact in the world while still generating market rate returns for our investors. So we are proving that it can be done, and we do a lot of educating to try to help reconnect investors with the power they have as investors. So I promised that I would tell you basically the one book that I read that I really do feel is the key to my success. And it is the Bible. You might not be surprised to hear me say that, but one of the things, when I was going through my wilderness journey, one of the things that I did twice, actually, I read through the Bible from beginning to end. The first time I did it just in order of the Bible. The second time I got a guide and I did it chronologically. And I was keeping just notes as I went through it. And by the second time through, I realized, oh my gosh, all of the things that I've ever done in terms of how I am in business, how I run a business, how I treat people, how I make decisions, all of it comes from principles in the Bible. And so I really do feel like that is my own, very own success secret. I think if you look at the Bible as this historic reference, you might miss all of those wonderful things that actually can help guide your life today. So my last thing I'm going to leave with you is something that I read that I'm going to keep with me forever. And it's that whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as if you're working for God and not for men. That's Colossians 3:23. And as I mentioned, not really because I had that scripture in my mind at the time, but that is what I did. I lived my life to honor God, and I feel like God has honored me. Thank you for your time today, and I look forward to Q&A.
Wow, thank you so much, Mrs. Nelund. My goodness, I took so many nuggets from that. One thing I definitely took was that she didn't check with her husband. That always happens with me. My wife makes all the decisions. She never asks me anything. The second thing is you're a problem solver. And I would like to somehow have Sam Chung billionaire attached to my name. So if you can figure out that problem, that would be amazing. But we're so honored to have Mrs. Nelund here. If you have questions, please put them in the chat box. Mrs. Nelund, I'm so curious, at what point through the wilderness journey did you realize that that had been your calling?
Well, so when I retired, I really, I set out to find out, so what is my purpose? So I did a lot of things at the beginning. Like I said, I joined several Bible studies. I joined the master's program. I started reading the Bible from beginning to end. And it was all in search of, what is my calling? What's my purpose? And in the beginning of it, I really thought that would be fast. I thought, oh, the Lord will just show me, here, become this pastor or go be this missionary or do whatever. And when that wasn't coming, I just would do more. And so that's when I started traveling around the world doing, philanthropic things. And I just dug into it more and more. And it really was a 2-year period that I felt frustrated. So I didn't call it my wilderness journey until it was almost over. And I didn't know it was going to be over. It really could have gone on forever. But I went to this event that was put on by World Vision, and it really was based on the whole halftime book, an idea of having more purpose in your life. And one of the things they had you do was draw your life on a flip chart, only using only using pictures, and it had to be like really short. So I remember like breaking my life into 4 segments. And the one that I was in at the time, all I did was draw these like squiggly lines. And that was at the point that I called it my wilderness journey, because I was like, I feel like I'm searching, but I don't know where I'm going. And it wasn't too long after that a whole bunch of things happened in a very short period of time. Someone had given me a book that was Business as a Mission. That was the title of the book. And then also I had these people from very different points in my life reach out to me through different mediums. Like one emailed, one actually came to LA and called me up and stopped by. And these are not people who knew each other. These are all just random things. One, I saw a write-up, somebody sent me a link to a write-up somebody had done on Facebook, because I don't have Facebook. So they were like, Gloria, you got to see this. So all these things happen where all these people are telling me what a difference I've made in their life. And this was, through my career. And based on like that and a whole bunch of things that were happening, is when I really felt like the Lord said, Gloria, business is your calling. Like you were doing what I wanted you to do. And I do feel like there was also a lot of value to me going through the wilderness journey. And I'll tell you a really quick story. One moment where I was particularly frustrated, but it was fortunately nearing the end, which again, I didn't know that at the time, but I have a really good girlfriend, like my best friend, who I had invited to church, and she never wanted to come. And but we do talk about, we always did talk about the Lord and things. And I was starting a new Bible study, and I thought I should ask her. But then I had that like doubt of, well, but she'll probably say no. And then I finally decided, well, you know what? I'm just going to ask her. And so I end up asking her. She comes to Bible study, and through this process, she ends up coming to know the Lord and accepting the Lord. And one morning when I was doing my devotions, I really felt like I had the Lord say to me, so Gloria, what if I told you that was the entire purpose for your life, was so that she could come to that moment? Like, are you going to be okay with that? And it really took me aback, and I thought, wow, would I be? And as I prayed about it and thought about it, I thought, I really would be okay with that. Like, if that's it, if that is my whole purpose for being here, to just save that one person, it's worth it. And I really do feel like after that is when things started to free up. Like the Lord said, okay, well, that wasn't the only reason. So I do have some other things for you.
Yeah, like being the only female CEO to run a $50 billion fund. I mean, those are things that people get called to also. That's pretty awesome. Yeah, no, so, I mean, part of that question, Ivy was asking, you answered the first part, but then she said, ultimately, how did she find the answer that propelled her to pursue and renew her purpose?
Yeah, and that really was through all these people reaching out to me, and through the books I was reading and conversations I was having, that all were around helping me realize that business is a calling. Like, I really did not believe that before. I grew up believing that the only way you could serve God is if you were a missionary or pastor, and I wasn't either. So it was finally through those conversations and through reading those that I was able to get that out of my head and realize that business was my calling, and that's when everything changed. And then I was asked to join a think tank discussion group in London right after that. And the topic was, how do we use capitalism to solve social problems? And then that's for me when the light bulb went off to start the company I started and do what I'm doing now.
That's amazing. And, to that end, I just want to give a shout out to McMedia and to Dale Leniak, who is running the production today, because they're gifting a lot of their services today because this is part of their mission field and they feel like they're doing a service. And one of the production assistants who's sitting right next to me here, Christine, I just asked her, do you go to church? And she said, I used to, but I think like these are the types of activities that can get people thinking again and wondering, oh, how can I be more intentional about the relationships that I create? So I love that. And could someone add in the chat the name of the book that Ms. Nelund was reading? Because if you're going to walk away from a $50 billion fund because you read a book, I'm curious what that book is, and I would like to read it also. I don't know how many pages that book is, but I'm very curious to dive into it.
It's short. It's called Halftime. And it is by Bob Buford, really strong Christian businessman out of Texas.
Okay, so we're going to move on to the questions from the group. How do you feel about the love for money being the source of all evil?
I think the key is that it's the love of money. I think anything that you put ahead of God is going to cause problems. And money, it's easy because people get entrapped by all the things that money does. And then they lose touch with reality. And so I think it's all about that word, the love of money. And it would be the love of anything, right? The love of gold, the love of you're getting your mail. Like if that was all you thought about all day long was getting your mail and you couldn't have a relationship with God until you got your mail, like that would be a problem, right? And so I think and I was glad whoever put that in there was clarifying that it was the love of money, because a lot of people do misquote that, that money is the root of all evil, and it's not. It's really the love of money. So that's my view.
No, 100%. Like my pastor used to say when he was growing up, he couldn't wait to buy a muscle car. And one day he got a 67 Pontiac Firebird, and he would polish the entire car every Saturday. And his neighbor said to him, hey, you love to worship that car. He's like, what are you talking about? He's like, every Saturday you get on your knees and you worship this car for 2 hours. And he was like, oh, wow, I didn't think about it that way. And so whenever you put something before that relationship, it's really interesting. Wondering what your experience was as a woman functioning at the leadership level. What was the greatest challenge and how did you overcome that?
Yeah, we were just talking about this in my breakout before this, because I was the highest ranking woman at Deutsche Bank. We did all these leadership events all over the world, and I was out of 300 managers, I was the only woman. But I honestly never noticed it until someone pointed it out. I didn't have any issues as a woman, but I was telling Keely, she made a comment about being like in her own head, and so she might have missed things. And I said, I think that was exactly it for me. Like I was totally focused on serving God, doing, solving problems, helping people, making a difference. And I was in my own head, and I did not notice anything else that might have been going on. So I could have had like people say things to me, and I just didn't notice. So it is a very, very male-dominated industry, and I know that a lot of women have issues, but I really didn't. And I think I really do feel like God blessed me with that ability to not notice.
Yeah, sometimes not seeing it is a blessing in itself. One question that came up is, what would have helped you to discover that business was your mission if it was to play out again? How can we do that now for people who don't know about BAM? So really, how do people that are going through the wilderness now kind of come to that light bulb moment, aha moment of, hey, this is what I should be doing?
Yeah, I think I tried to talk to my pastor about this, and I didn't get very far. But one of the things that I noticed is that churches really, a lot of what they talk about, right, is not geared towards business-minded people. And so one of the things that I had suggested is, well, why don't you have, like, if you do these small groups, which our church does, why don't you have some that are for, business people? Because one of the things, like even in my my Bible studies that I was in, I was with women that stayed at home with their kids. And so just from a relational perspective, I had a hard time. And the issues that I was dealing with weren't the same as the issues any of them were dealing with. And so I think churches need to help create an environment where people realize that business is an important calling. And again, I mean, I don't know how we go about doing that, but everybody encourage your churches to make sure you are reaching out to business people in a way that reaches them. And then for business as a mission, I mean, it's one of the reasons I love supporting your organization is because you guys do a lot of outreach and help people realize that business is a mission. And, you know, you need to work through what your calling is, but it doesn't mean it can't be business. Now, there are people who are called to be pastors and missionaries, and that's what they should do. So not everybody has business as a calling, but I think we should work to make it more comfortable for people to know that that really is a calling.
Absolutely. And you know, one of our sponsors for today's event is 10th Avenue Alliance Church. My wife works at that church. And the head pastor there, Ken Shigematsu, he says, you know, with so many messages coming at you every day, are you taking time to sit in silence and listen? Are you taking time to meditate on God's word? And he gives us all of these apps that we should be using to just take that moment of silence in the day to reflect on what God might have planned for you, instead of looking at a social media feed and realizing, hey, I can't do 1,000 burpees for an hour without dying. And especially during COVID, none of us can do that. But moving forward, can you share about some of the businesses that your company has invested in? Any struggles that these businesses have had? And do you have any success stories?
We have a lot of success stories. So we basically invest in small, mid-sized businesses in emerging markets that are in their growth stage. And the reason it's important that they're in their growth stage is our fund is designed for individual investors, and there is a risk profile that those investors expect. And they really invest in it for the income. And so they expect it to deliver market rate returns and deliver this positive impact in the world. And so we have to make sure that we can properly risk manage the loans that we make, which means it's got to be growth stage, because at that stage, they have cash flows to be able to make their loan payments. They have assets that we can take as collateral. So we only do senior secured like lending where we can be first in the capital stack. That way, if anything does go wrong, we can protect our investors. And as a loan fund, you know, things happen, right? So early on, we had this diaper manufacturer still in the portfolio in Peru that the CEO was an ex-Kimberly-Clark executive, started the company because he noticed, he was from Peru, he noticed that the infant mortality rate was rising, primarily due to unsanitary conditions in the rural areas associated with cloth diapers, because they couldn't afford the disposable diapers. So the disposable diapers that were in Peru at the time were all the higher end brands. And so basically there was this old technology that existed for diapers. So he got that technology, and then he created these lower cost disposable diapers and partnered with a pharmacy. So think of a Walgreens or a CVS or something that's everywhere, right? And he partnered with them, and they would distribute these diapers through their stores in 1 or 2 packs in an affordable way, so that people could go in and buy them daily or whatever it was. And so when we made them a loan, because they were so successful that the pharmacy wanted them to expand into adult diapers because they were having the same issue. So we were financing their equipment to be able to do the adult diapers. And basically, when they were due to make their very first principal and interest payment, they were going to be late. And they called us and said, hey, our equipment got delayed, so we haven't been able to meet this order, so we can't make our first payment. And so our first job, right, is to figure out, okay, what's really going on? So we flew a team down there, and the analysis was, is this true? Yes, it was. We could see that the equipment had now gotten there. Then we went and met with the pharmacy to make sure they were going to still take the contract, that they were going to pay out even though it was delayed. We got all that secured. And then we worked with the company to restructure the loan, making sure that we got some benefit for investors. And that was a really great success story with a company that got in trouble and did the right thing. We had another one, though, that was a scrap metal recycler in Indonesia, who actually, it turned out that there was some fraud involved, and about 3 tons of scrap metal went missing. Now, fortunately, in that case, there are collateral managers, because that serves as our collateral, and those collateral managers are insured. And so that's part of what we do to secure our investors' capital, is we have all of those things in place. And while it did take us about a 2-year legal battle, we won. We got all of our money back. We got the insurance paid out, and investors, got their money as a result of that, plus interest. And we have not all of our companies are social impact companies, like in their business mission, but a lot of them are. We have a company in Mexico that turns solid municipal waste into low carbon jet fuel. Wow. And so we've provided them capital to grow and expand their plants. So it solves obviously a municipal waste problem, but it also helps. United and American are both 2 of the airlines that use their jet fuel.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. We have lots more questions for you, but we're going to save them till the second question and answer period. We're going to move forward with another video. Like I said earlier, we have these eagle's nests when we do the live conferences where people can compete and share about their business and raise money through the BAM conference. BAM conference partners with the ACE Development Fund, and we raise money to give to these companies that have business as a mission focus. One of these companies that participated was from Southeast Asia called Lighthouse Coffee.
So glad to be sharing with you our story of business as mission. We are Lighthouse Coffee. Our business is specialty coffee, grown, harvested, and prepared for export in the beautiful western mountains of Myanmar. We've been at this business for 3 years now. Early days had us trying various business opportunities in the agricultural sector, all which failed until we keyed in on specialty coffee. The business has grown steadily over these 3 years and now includes a formalized business arm here in Canada. It's Lighthouse Coffee Roasters Inc., which roasts the Myanmar coffee and markets it to customers across Canada. While the business is coffee, the mission has always been transformation. By transformation, we're talking about lives transformed, communities transformed, even countries transformed. This transformation includes economic hope, where it's been hard to find. Access to markets so that the labor and efforts of people yields opportunity. Access to healthcare through the simple act of providing training for a nurse. Education and training by providing a center for that to take place. And spiritual transformation by introducing people to Jesus. Let me introduce you to some people that believe in this mission. Dave and Louise Sinclair Peters left a comfortable lifestyle as pastors in Williams Lake, British Columbia, 20 years ago for Thailand. First working with the Myanmar migrant workers in the large Thai factories, and then 4 years ago heading to Myanmar to work with these people in the agricultural heartland, all to bring this good news and transformation. Isaiah Zayar Min is the president and entrepreneurial leader of Lighthouse Coffee. As a 14-year-old boy, he fled his homeland of Myanmar to escape the rebel fighting taking place. He feared being drawn into the conflict to which he had lost childhood friends. It was in Thailand that Isaiah was introduced to Jesus. It changed everything for him. In his 20s, Isaiah met Dave and Louise and they became a team. 4 years ago, they moved together back to Myanmar and the story of Lighthouse Coffee began. Laya is another one that understands the mission. She's the first ever university graduate from her home village in Naga in the north of Myanmar. She's also our first operations manager at the Lighthouse Coffee Station on the mountain. Her business degree was instrumental in understanding systems and ensured excellence in the coffee harvesting and processing, key to the business. Laya's understanding of the mission is what makes her special, though. She hopes to take both the business and the mission of transformation back to her home village in Naga. She's already started a nursery for coffee plants in Naga, so it'll be ready for her when she's back there. In March last year, BAM Vancouver asked Lighthouse Coffee if we'd pitch our business to the Eagle's Nest at BAM 2020. We were honored by the opportunity, but what we did not know at the time was the gift it was to bring our team together and think deeply about our mission. And for that, we thank BAM Vancouver. We in Canada engaged with our team halfway around the world in Myanmar to present our business and make a case for investment. This slide you're looking at was our ask of the Eagles for funds for a tractor and a training center. The tractor would keep the roads open around the coffee farms, which are often washed out in the rainy season, blocking accessibility for both people and goods. It'd be a huge help for the farmers as well on the coffee farms, the people in the communities, and for movement of the coffee to market. The training center was important if we were going to be true to our mission of transformation and help with education and equipping of the people of the area. Our audacious ask of the Eagles was for $95,000 to see this into reality. Then the unthinkable happened, and we called it COVID. The BAM Vancouver 2020 event was canceled, and our presentation was dropped into the drawer and forgotten. Dismayed for a while, we got back to work at hand of growing and marketing coffee, and like all of you, we learned to navigate this new reality of a world pandemic. We're often faced with things that are completely out of our control. COVID has been one of these things we have all had to face. We want to encourage you to stay true to your mission and diligent in your business so that it will survive the present and thrive into the future. While COVID took away our opportunity to present to the Eagles last year, it did not take away our hope in the faithfulness of our God and in His favor. He was at work on our behalf. In the fall of 2020, through the generosity of a foundation we did not know back in March, a training center started to take shape on Coffee Mountain. Subsequently, in late December, a number of generous individuals offered funds for a tractor. While we were hopeful in March for a used tractor and a one-story training center, our God provided for us a new 80-horsepower Kubota tractor with a 3-year warranty and a 3-story training center. Both tractor and training center are providing transformation on the mountains of Myanmar. This coming 2021 season, we're expecting our coffee harvest to be 6 times that of the previous year. For this, we are grateful. We're also dealing with the uncertainty of the current coup in Myanmar, and on top of that, still COVID. In all of this, we're full of hope, for we know who we serve. Our mission's clear.
Well, that's super encouraging to see people starting businesses all over the world. I was just saying to Christine here, how difficult must it be to start a new business, an impact business, with so few resources? We're so blessed here in Canada, and wherever you are, it's so hard to start something from scratch, especially when there are so few resources. Moving forward, we're going to go into our third breakout room. Please make sure that your name is listed in your chat box. Also, I wanted to give a little bit of kudos to one of our sponsors. Dr. Sandra Tai is an orthodontist, world-renowned orthodontist. She speaks all over the world. And it just reminds me of what having a business partner and a mentorship is like. I know this sounds strange, but the other night I was brushing my teeth, and I thought to myself, there's no way, you can't brush your teeth enough times to get in between your teeth. You have to floss. And I thought to myself, the mentors in my life are like the floss that I'm using. They help me get to the places that I cannot reach on my own. They guide me through the really difficult, narrow spaces. And so when you're in these breakout rooms, I mean, I can't imagine, like, you get to speak to all of these business leaders from around the world. Take this time, build these relationships, and we'll see you in 15 minutes. Thank you so much. Welcome back, guys. We have a really special treat for you now. As I said earlier, for those who were here at the beginning, I started out as an artist. I sang opera all over the world. But what we have today is a world-renowned artist. They've worked with absolutely everybody, and they study and work in New York City. Andrew Nemr is a world-famous tap dancer, and he's here to perform for us today. Wow, Andrew, that was incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. We have a really special time now. We have a few minutes with Andrew where we get to ask him questions as well. I know that for me, I'd like to kind of kick it off. As a performer, Andrew, my question is, what are you doing today during this time, this season of the pandemic, to help others, still feel that normalcy of performing?
Yeah, my life has changed dramatically over the past year. As many know, much of the live performance industry is completely shut down. So much of my work is transferred to online. I coach a number of dancers. Local dance education has opened up a little bit where I'm at. So I have the opportunity to teach young up and coming dancers, which is a lot of fun. And thankfully, there's been just enough provision coming through from one-off gigs over the past couple months. Some areas of the entertainment business have had to try to figure out how to keep going, and so they still need talent, and so I still get called, which is great.
That's awesome. And one thing that I find really interesting about what you do is you're not only an artist, you're also a business person. Can you talk a little bit about how you marry those two? They seem like a dichotomy in a way, but really for those who are artists and business people, they go together more than people realize.
By all means, that's a really good question. Thank you. So as an artist, I am a freelancer. I've self-produced. The way that I think about it is that everything happens in the context of the market. So there's no way that I can be an artist and not have to find out how to provide provision for the work that I do, even if that's accounting for 3 hours of practice in the studio. Not to even think about hiring dancers to produce a show or hiring a band to collaborate. Even if it's not with an audience. Everybody when it comes to a certain level of work is on the clock. And so yeah. Once you're there, you're in business.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that I find that was interesting, as I've talked to a lot of my friends who are artists, one thing that we were never taught as artists was financial literacy. I don't know what it's like in the dance community, but a lot of my friends have said, I wish someone came in, in music, we get music theory, music history, we get, all of these classes and programs, but we don't ever get financial literacy. And it's kind of crazy because no one needs it more than an artist.
Yeah, and especially in today's market where many artists are tasked with being self-producing artists, right? We're in a context where, the structures that used to distribute and used to kind of sign artists and develop them and then send them out are waiting for artists to develop their own audiences and have their own material, and then they sign them. Then they say, great, you have a trustworthy investment here, we can take you on, but all the development costs are on the artist now. And so it's really important for artists to have the knowledge of what that takes.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that always stands out for me is when I was singing with Vancouver Opera, they're a very, very good company, very generous company. And the minimum show fee, if you're a main stage performer, if you're one of the lead roles, the minimum show fee is like $1,500 to $1,700 per night, which is not bad when you're thinking of multiple shows in a month. But it's feast and famine because you go months and months without shows, and then you have to figure out how to maintain the money that you've made over a very short period of time. Do you work with the artists that you teach on how to save money and how to be financially independent?
Yeah, so most of the artists that I work with are either very young or already professional. The one-on-one coaching that I do, it really depends on where the artist is. If they're working on their craft, we focus there. If they're in this transitional phase, there's some teenagers that I work with that are really trying to discover what it looks like to be a professional tap dancer or a professional artist in general. And at that point, we start talking about, well, what are your expenses? And how do you propose to cover those?
Absolutely. Really good question from the group is, within the context of work and faith, how would you describe your interpretation of worship?
My interpretation of worship within the context of work and faith?
Yeah, so, I mean, as an artist, and marrying that to BAM, you know, BAM calls us out to go out and make our work our mission field. And then how do you marry that with the work that you do?
The way I approach it is, I exist as a human being, and wherever I am, that's where I am.
Mm.
So if I am living a life in pursuit of the way, in following Christ, then that happens whatever I put my hands to, in whatever work I do. I'm not just a tap dancer. So I'm engaged in visual art, I'm engaged in consultation and coaching and teaching and education. And so the reflection of the love that I've received as a son of God has to be reflected out in all those areas. It can't just be an industry specific kind of thing.
And my last question to you, because you know, I know we have you for a short time, but my last question to you is, you know, Miss Nelund talked about going through the desert, her wilderness experience, and how she came to know what God's experience was for her. Most artists say, I think I want to become an artist. I think I want to be a singer, a dancer. What do you say to people who are thinking of going into an artistic career?
Go and figure it out. Because as an artist, there's not going to be a path. There's not going to be a way forward that is presented and every step happens as you envision it. There have been many times in my life where I've thought I've known what the way is going to be, and I go, and you know, within 6 months or within 10 years, it changes.
Yeah.
And so as an improvisational artist, there's a lot that I've gleaned from my own practice that comes into the actual journey. But if anyone feels a tug towards a creative practice, like a specific form, I would say go, because even if that doesn't become a profession, you will have a practice of a heightened expression that you can glean from in your own life.
No, that's amazing. And for me, as an artist, I know what a wilderness looks like for an artist, because we can go a year or 2 years without making any money. I wonder what the wilderness looks like when you have $1 billion. I don't know. I would like to know what that looks like, but I'm not sure.
Well, I think there's a sense of, you know, wilderness not just being a financial issue.
Absolutely.
You know, I've had times where I've been completely supported as an artist and still felt completely lost.
Absolutely. Myself as well. I completely relate to that. Thank you, Andrew, so much for your time. Thank you for sharing that beautiful performance with us. We really appreciate you joining us from New York today. We look forward to, Andrew has a lot of videos on YouTube. You can follow him, and he also does a lot of workshops, a lot of teaching. So if you have any interest, I believe you have a website as well, Andrew?
Yeah, andrewnemr.com. I'll put it in the chat for everyone.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Moving forward, guys, we have another video that we want to share with you. It's from Food for the Hungry. They go out into the community. They're one of our sponsors today. And they go out into the community and they help them get out of poverty. They make a big social impact. And if you want to learn more about them, go to fhcanada.org. And we have a short video from them. Oh, only a picture. Well, that's only a picture. That was a very, very short video from them. It was one frame, and it was fhcanada.org if you would like to learn more about how you can work with them to help communities come out of poverty. Guys, we've been so blessed today to have international speakers from all over the world. We have Ms. Nelund calling in from Manhattan Beach, California. We have Mr. Tunehag from Sweden. We have President Santa Ono here from Vancouver, and we have Mr. Boyd here from, are you here from Phoenix today, Mr. Boyd? Somewhere warmer than Vancouver, probably.
I'm actually in Hawaii today.
Hawaii, okay, boohoo. All right, so we have Mr. Boyd here from Hawaii, and they've been gracious enough to stick around so that we could collectively ask them questions. If you have a question, you can press the reaction button, raise your hand, and we will call on you, or you can add questions into the chat box and direct it to the person who you would like to answer the question. That way we can ask them one by one questions, and they're going to stick around to answer all of the questions that you guys have. I would like to start with questions. For myself, I wanted to ask Mr. Tunehag, you said what you learn on Sunday, you practice on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. A question came up in the chat earlier where someone said, would you then go out and hire people that were Christian, non-Christian? How do you think about it? And you had alluded to the fact that search for good people and live through that example. I wondered if you could expand on that.
Yeah, and I mean, in business or in other organizations, you need to hire the right person for the job. You look at different qualifications and also in integrity and passion and vision and all that, and they may or may not be Christians. But that is not the issue. Business as mission is not about hiring Christians, even though you can do that too, but that's not a purpose in and of itself. So we want to be a blessing to all people. We talked about the different neighbors, the different kind of stakeholders in business, and for a business to be able to be a blessing and have a positive impact on multiple bottom lines or multiple stakeholders, we need to have the right people so we can continue to bless different stakeholders.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Super useful things to take forward. We have a question from Dan Weeb. Oh, I love Mr. Weeb. Hi, Mr. Weeb. To David Boyd, is there any type of government that you could not deal with?
Well, I tend not to think in terms of impossibilities. But obviously more highly centrally controlled governmental environments would be a little more problematic for entrepreneurs to start up something new. That said, I'm sure, I suspect that Matt could describe for us examples within the BAM movement where business startups have taken place in Marxist countries or others. So I'm not sure, we're presently working with a number of Muslim governments. I wouldn't have expected that. But the demand for change and the need for change is pushing governments to think in new ways. And I would just leave it at that.
That's awesome. And I wanted to follow up with Miss Nelund, because something that I've been thinking about since she spoke is she's clearly a trailblazer. To be a female CEO at the top of the banking industry is incredibly rare. I personally have a startup that I've been running myself, and we're creating an app that helps hire with equality in the forefront so that companies can hire with diversity in mind. And one of the big stats that comes out is the disparity with female hiring. And so being a trailblazer in that industry, it seems as though you didn't know you were making the impact that you had made until someone had informed you. Can you tell us at what point that came to light, and how did that make you feel? And are you taking that mantle and carrying it forward?
Yeah, I didn't realize it. So I was probably, was like in 2004, and I had started my career in 1979. So it was, 30 some years into my career before I realized it. And it really wasn't until this woman pointed it out to me. So I had been attending these groups. They were called Lead 300. It was the top 300 managers from all over the world for Deutsche Bank. And we would go off site and have these meetings. And I'd been to at least 10 of them before this happened. So over a period of years. And one time there was a particular group that was presenting. And so the head of that division brought in his strategy person, who happened to be a woman, and she was presenting. And I was sitting in the middle of the room at this table, and I noticed that she just kept staring at me, and it was so uncomfortable. Like I didn't want to look away, because I just thought, oh, obviously her attention or whatever, maybe she's uncomfortable. It was weird. And after they were done presenting, I noticed that she was like making a beeline for my table. And I mean, I'm thinking, uh-oh, do I know her? And she came right over to me and she grabbed my arm and she said, I have been dying to know what it's like to be the only woman ever at these meetings. And I looked around and I was like, I never noticed that. And I honestly had never noticed until she said it. And so after I had retired, I was giving a talk to a group. It was a couples group that was put on by a faith-based organization out of Texas. And I was one of the speakers. So my husband and I were both there. But after my talk, and I was telling that story, and after my talk, I had all of these men come up to me and say, oh my gosh, I was so glad to hear you say that. Like, because I often think it's not an issue. And I don't now know how to be, or, how to act. And so then it gets more uncomfortable. And so I realized that, wow, that's something that I can help women with, is, helping get them in a frame of mind that it doesn't have to be about that, right? You've got to, and I'm not trying to say there isn't any inequality or anything, but I think sometimes there is more of it gets made of it than should, because of the focus on it and the light on it. And I think, yes, there are definitely things that need to be done. But I also think that we have to be responsible for our side of it too. So.
No, it's funny that you should say that, because if you want to know about inequality, I have been working in female empowerment for the last 7 years, and I'm typically the only man at these female-led events. And when you walk in for the first time, they look at you like you are the enemy until you prove that you are there to fight for the cause. Okay, so we have a question from earlier. Christine, could you just go up one question? That'd be awesome. Okay, question for Gloria. Based on your plethora of professional experience, what are the 3 leadership traits that can easily create leadership pitfalls for the people who follow them?
Let's see, that could create pitfalls for the people who follow you. Well, one I would say is ego, because ego gets in the way of everything, of a lot of things. And one of our values at our firm is like low ego. And we actually interview for that when we're bringing people into the firm, because it's a problem, right? And I would imagine that for someone that's trying to follow someone who has a big ego, that would be tough. I mean, I've worked for people with big egos, so actually I know it's tough. I don't know, David or Matt, do you have any other? I can't even think of any others.
Yeah, I would say in your example, one thing that you've done unknowingly is lead by example. And you just said, you echoed something that our pastor says all the time. He says, work like it's your company. Work like you're the owner, and work tirelessly, and you will see growth through that. So it's a really lead by example situation. Because you started as a clerk.
Yes.
And you worked to be the first CEO of like Deutsche Bank and all these huge banks. Okay, there are more questions coming. To David, some believe that the large tech firms, example Apple, Amazon, Google, have driven job destruction that will eliminate the middle class. What are your thoughts, and what options do we have to ensure all people have the opportunity to live a life they value?
I'm not sure the companies do that as much as technology drives change. And some people struggle with change. Actually, most people struggle with change. And I think while new technologies will change work environments and eliminate certain jobs, not just in the middle class. It also produces environments for new ways of thinking and new jobs. And I think that is proliferating more than the other, personally. But I think it depends on what set of glasses you're wearing, and how welcoming you are to change and willing to think outside the box of how we've always done it to how could we create something new in this environment.
No, that's great. Yeah, not to look so granular at those companies.
Sam, may I address this?
Please.
No, I think, David is right. And also as we look at history and changes, in terms of innovations and so forth, there's always been disruptors. There's always been jobs that's been lost. But as things have changed and progressed, history shows that for the job losses that usually happens in these kinds of transitions, there are more jobs actually created. And it hasn't been, it never will be a zero-sum game. I mean, we're 7 billion people now on the planet. And just a generation ago, we were only half the size of the world population. And if we go back to my grandparents' generation, most people lived and worked on a farm. And now just a few percentage in Canada, Sweden, and live. Are they all unemployed? No new jobs have been created. And of the 100+ people who are on this webinar, I would guess that a large percentage here have titles that didn't even exist when I was young. So new jobs are created.
And following through with that, there's a question from Carrie Ann that says, I would love to hear from each speaker what their one encouragement would be for someone starting on their BAM journey. So if we could go back to ladies first, Ms. Neal, if you could tell us what was the encouragement that you could give for someone starting on their BAM journey?
I would say make sure that you're spending enough time with the Lord. So that you listen and you hear really what He wants for you. I have always had a habit of spending the first hour of my day with the Lord, no matter how early that has to be. And when I don't, it's never a good day. But just spending that time actually gets me more in tune with being able to see and hear opportunities throughout the day. And so whether it's the morning or the afternoon or the evening, I would say establish a time that is every day that you spend time with the Lord and listen as much as you are active. And I think it's the best way to learn.
Yes, absolutely. Mr. Boyd, do you want to answer the same question?
Well, I'd underline what Gloria just said, but in a different track, I would say learn from the mistakes of others. You don't have enough time to make them all yourself. I'm trying. Most significant forward movements in my life, and I suspect with many of you, has been through failure or through unexpected changes. And I think our capacity to respond to failure or to a COVID or to anything else that's not expected outside the box has much to do with being able to create again. We're still creators and can create new environments.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mr. Tunehag, could you also answer the question?
I'm with David. I often say, I don't want to repeat old mistakes. I want to do new, fresh mistakes. Because we're bound to do mistakes, but at least it should be new, fresh ones. So we can gain some more learning collectively. I would say, which I often actually say, is go with God and the flow. Don't be too rigid. Don't be too nervous. It has to follow a certain pattern or a timeline, because it usually doesn't. But you may have a sense of direction. Yes, I want to go into business, or I want to get into teach at an MBA program. You have a sense of direction. So go with God and with the flow, and let God surprise you. So it may not be the way yet you had intended. Oh, this is how it's going to work. This is my 5-year strategic plan for my career and life. You know, Moses had a sense of, hey, and we need to help these people out of slavery, and he had his solution that didn't work, and he was thrown out in the desert for 40 years to rethink. And so, you know, that was 40 years of rethinking and regrouping, and then there was a Kairos moment. So don't be, in our day and age, we say, oh, it needs to happen. I need to follow a plan, and, you know, I can't lose a month or whatever it is. No, God often sees things differently. So go with him and the flow. Part of that flow is also, we live in such a changing world. So God will surprise you. You said, I have this sense of direction. This is what I'm going to do. And all of a sudden, as you walk, a new horizon opens up that you have never thought about. I have no business background in family or in education. And if somebody had asked me 35 years ago, are you going to be involved in business? I would say, never. That was not on my radar. Not because I thought it was bad or evil. It was just not me. So, you know, it's kind of ironic. Here I have now spent the last 25 plus years in 100 plus countries later working on business as mission stuff. God totally surprised me, but it was God's thing.
Yeah, and can I just add to that really quick? One of the things that I felt like the Lord taught me, and this was for me specifically, I don't know if this is true for everybody, but I so wanted a plan, right? I really wanted to know, okay, what is that plan? And I got to the point where I had to literally listen to the Lord every day for that day. And when I did, right, and I was open to what was going to happen that day, he did surprise me sometimes, and things worked out great. And I really feel like the Lord said to me, you know, Gloria, I'm probably never going to lay out the whole plan for you, because at some point you will say, okay, God, I have it from here. And I don't want you to do that, right? I want you to rely on me day by day, step by step. And I think we all have a tendency to say, okay, I've got this. But he doesn't want us to got this.
It's so true. And I would say, like, for myself, I have a 1-year-old daughter, and every milestone that she overcomes, she thinks she has it all figured out. She's like, I've got this now. I'm walking. You don't have to touch me. I'm good. And then she falls and she cries. But there's also this huge lack of trust, because as she was growing, she would get a bottle every 2 hours. And like, when she would see that bottle come out, she thought we were starving her. She'd be screaming like, give me that bottle. Like, and we often do that with God. We say like, God's withholding that good thing from us, but he's preparing it on time so that you'll have enough for every day. I love that. So Ivy has posted a question about the pitfalls that she asked. Can the other two speakers talk about one leadership pitfall that you could avoid moving forward? Mr. Boyd, why don't we start with you?
Assuming you have to have all the answers.
Yeah.
You know, people tend to elevate leadership. And if you start believing that lie, you will not grow. And I would look for, in your leadership structure, look for giftings in others that are different or even stronger than yours, to complement, to create a full complement within your team.
You know, there's a great book called Overcoming Your Strengths that is all about that.
Yeah, no, I agree. That is good and important. And make sure you have people around you who like you, but disagree with you. Because if I think David is hitting at that as well. You know, if you can get into a leadership bubble where you think you have all the answers. So it's good to have a team where you have the same sense of directions. You buy into the same kind of vision and mission. Mm-hmm. But then you need to make sure you have people who act or play the devil's advocate and constantly ask questions. And it's not questioning you necessarily as a leader, even though that may be good at times as well. But just ask questions. Is this the best way of doing things? And what can we learn from history? What can we learn from what others have done? And so this constantly asking questions, I think is absolutely essential as a leader.
Mm-hmm. One thing I like to do is I like to always be the dumbest person in the room. I mean, it's not hard, and clearly it's the case today, but I always like to be the dumbest person in the room so that I can lean on the experience of the people there. There was a question, Christine, could we just go up there was a question here. What are some examples of stepping out in faith with business decisions that go against human wisdom? And how do you navigate being led by the Spirit but practicing wise business practices? Could we go back to Mr. Tunehag?
Yeah, if I may tie into the question that David was asked, you know, are the governments you wouldn't work in or contexts that are corrupt or oppressive? And of course, we need good business environments. At the same time, we can't just ask, is this good for me and my business? We should also ask, can I and my business actually change the environment? And where we have to take a step in faith. And let me give you an example to illustrate that from Soviet Central Asia that then became post-Soviet Central Asia. So you had 70 years of a command economy, communist style economy. Most people had a Muslim background. As they became independent countries, they were in a disarray, big disarray for a number of years, and fairly corrupt. And in that circumstance, a friend of mine, he and his wife started a business in the early 90s, soon after the breakup of the Soviet Union. And they had about 60 employees. It was a medium-sized business. They did something that none of their competitors did. They had only one set of books. All their competitors had two sets of books. One which they kept for themselves so they can manage their own business and know the cash flow and all that kind of stuff. But one set of books that they used for the tax authorities. And when they came to audit their business, and they paid a bribe, they signed off the false books. And this was also a way that the auditors at the Inland Revenue, or the equivalent in that country, made some extra money. But the auditors at the tax authorities, they hated to go to my friend's company because they didn't make any extra money. They didn't pay a bribe. So they started to draw lots. Who's going to be the sucker this year to audit this company who doesn't pay a bribe? And the head of the tax authorities of that country heard what her subordinates were doing, and she got really, really mad. She said, "What are you doing? They are cheating like everybody else. I'm sure they're cheating." So she decided, I'm going to go there and audit the company myself. I'm going to bust them. I'm going to find where their flaw is. So she spent 2 weeks in their office, looked through all their books and receipts and everything. And after 2 weeks, she realized, these guys are honest. They're crazy. One set of books and they pay taxes. So this post-Soviet country, corrupt, most have a Muslim background. The head of the Inland Revenue of that country asked my friends, "Why are you doing this?" And they said, "Well, we're here to do business for God and for people, including our nation that we love. And they told sort of a BAM story. There and then, the head of the tax authorities decided to become a follower of Jesus in their office, doing something different, and also not just think, is this country good for my business? Can my business be good for the country?
That's amazing. Oh, I know I'm supposed to be watching the chat, but I was totally focused on that story. So I'm going to go over to Miss Nelund. If you could answer the same question.
I don't know, man. That's tough. Following that, it's really funny. I was trying to find it because, especially early on when I had started TriLinc, I had lots of challenges, where it was really tough, to get through certain things, and financially especially, but there were also people that really disappointed me and that I, had thought were good people, and then I found out they weren't. And sometimes it cost me money. And I always had to say, you know what, but if it's the right thing to do, then that's what I need to do. I can't let the financial side of it drive me. And so I started having all of these things that were, I'm going to call them little success stories. And as I was going through doing one of my Bible studies, I was reminded of how Joshua was told to, after they crossed the river, to build the memorial stones as a remembrance of, what God had done for them. And so I started keeping this little journal of my own little memorial stones every time something would happen, where it was truly a miracle. And like I said, early on, we had quite a few of those. We completely ran out of money and weren't going to be able to pay payroll. And it was one of those situations where we were so close to getting everything done. And, I felt like I had done everything I could. I mean, I think I did do everything I could. And I just thought, you know what, I just need to get on my knees and pray about it and say, you know what, Lord, this is your company. This was your idea. This is your, everything. And so you just show me, like, what is it you want me to do? And I really felt like the Lord said, well, you know what, I don't want you to do anything today. And all of our team thought I was just nuts. Like, why aren't you doing something? And I said, look, you guys, I prayed about it. And I don't know, maybe something, he's going to tell me tomorrow what I should do. But today, we're just going to put our head down and we're going to do this. And later that afternoon, we got a refund check we had moved space, and we got a refund check that was for our prior space that was exactly the amount of money we needed to make it through.
Amazing.
And I was like, okay, it was taking the time to do the right thing. And yes, anyway, that was it.
Taking the time to do the right thing. Great. Mr. Boyd, same question.
There's a Muslim proverb that goes, God made man with 2 ears and 1 mouth. Therefore, he ought to be listening twice as much as he is speaking. As Christians, I think we're oriented toward an awful lot of talking at others. And most of the governments I'm involved with are fragile states. They're governments that are in transition. And we went through a process over the last 6 years, 4 of which we basically only asked questions, because we came with an assumption of what we thought those governments needed. And it wasn't what they primarily needed. But the only way to discover what they needed was to ask enough questions and to build enough trust to where their leadership would be honest about what their needs were. And that led to the development of what we're doing with governments today. I think listening and asking questions is absolutely critical. It doesn't make you a lot of money up front, but it will build a stronger relationship with who you're serving, with your clientele.
You know, one thing Pastor Dave says all the time is he says it's an upside down kingdom when you're working God's way. It always isn't what you assume it should be. And so one thing that we've always done is be faithful with our giving. As soon as money comes in, we set aside a tithe for that amount to give back to the church, which goes against every business principle because you should be reinvesting into your business. It's always, when you do it God's way, it's always a little bit different from what they would have you do in the business sense, but the return is always so much more incredible when it comes through, when you do it God's way as opposed to what would typically be said to do. Moving forward, we have another question here, and it's basically something that's come up a bunch of times. You've all mentioned working in prayer, reading your Bible, thinking it through, and Stephen made a comment here. It is sometimes hard to discern the way of the Lord versus the way of the world. And when you're in that time of prayer, maybe we can start with Mr. Boyd. When you're in that time of prayer, how do you know what's God's direction and what's the way of the world, what's the way of God? How do you know what path to go down?
You know, I think you learn the tone of a voice over a long period of time. I've been married for 52 years. I know, you probably don't think I've been married that long. My wife robbed me out of the cradle. And it didn't take too many years to where I could almost read her thoughts without hearing her voice. Or I could hear her voice in darkness and I knew who it was. And I think it's similar in your walk with the Lord. It really is about knowing his character and his ways. And the longer you walk with the Lord, the more you understand the way he moves, what he does. And you'll sense a particular opportunity goes against that grain, or it's just too good to be true. You know that line. And a sense of subtleness. I think that's why the scripture calls it a still small voice. God doesn't yell at you, usually.
Great answer. Ms. Nelund, can we ask you the same question?
Sure. I would say the same thing, which is, God doesn't yell at you. For me, it really was being disciplined about spending time with him every day, so that it was exactly what David said, being in touch, being in tune with, what God was leading, how God was leading me. And I honestly didn't find myself in that many situations where it was different, like the way of the world was different than the way that God would want me to go. I didn't find myself in a lot of situations like that. And usually it was pretty obvious, what I needed to do or how I needed to go. And if it wasn't obvious, then I really would just spend time with the Lord and, study, do a Bible study, talk to people that I knew are also in touch with the Lord and, hopefully get wise counsel.
Absolutely. Yeah. Mr. Tunehag?
Yeah, I think it is, it's easy to say, but it's some guiding principle nevertheless. Is it honoring to God and is it helping people? Gloria, you mentioned that again, helping people, right? It's that dual dimension. Is it honoring God? Is it helping people? But then I love to ask questions, and I always do, and that's of course part. So we started a global think tank, because then you ask questions all the time. So I've asked so many business people around the globe. So in your daily business operations, how many of your tough decisions that have some kind of ethical dimension are black and white, and how many are in some kind of gray zone? Most say, 90+% are in the gray zone. I don't know Gloria and David would say, but there are, and it is not. It's very easy to put everything in black and white, but life isn't. But that's where I think also we need to acknowledge that there is wisdom in the counsel of many. Ask other people. I mean, even the early church got in this tricky situation. What are we going to do with the Gentiles when they come to faith? Oh, let's have a church council. Acts chapter 15. And the church has had that, throughout centuries. They came across a number of issues, and they were not totally black and white. There were all kinds of grays in there. And they say, well, we need to have a council asking that kind of question, believing that God speaks within that group. And I think that's important.
No, that's amazing. Christine, can I just ask you to scroll a bit? One thing that I love what Ms. Nelund said was, she said, if she doesn't hear it at that moment, she goes back into the Word. Like, she goes back and she's like, if it doesn't line up with that, because when people ask me, I teach Sunday school here, and people say, how do you know if it's God, or how do you know if it's something? And as a hockey-loving country, I say, I think just before someone's about to cross-check someone, I'm pretty sure they hear a voice in their head saying, you probably shouldn't do that. And when that voice rings in my head, I think to myself, is there a scripture or a Bible verse that lines up with that thought? And then it kind of gives me that I know I'm going in the right direction. I mean, we're benefits of the Swedish people here in Vancouver, being a hockey-loving country, but we're still better than you guys. So next question is...
That's okay. We're more humble, so...
Yes, you are. You are. We are all learners, and God is speaking. Oh, that's great. Your primary work is in ministry. You don't have to work in the church to be used by God. That's true. Be the light in your workplace, community, and business. Okay, so moving forward, everyone's obviously giving you guys kudos for the answers that you're giving. We're so appreciative. As we start to close the conference from today, if you could tell yourself, your 16-year-old self, your 20-year-old self, your 25-year-old self, one thing from that time in your life as you started on this journey, what's the one thing that you would like to tell yourself? Maybe we could start with Ms. Nelund again.
Wow, that's the disadvantage to being a woman. Going first.
He's first.
Yeah. I think it would probably be, in fact, I know it would be, to be more present. So I didn't really learn to be more present until I had retired. And I would say that was a really big, remember I said I learned a lot of things through that wilderness journey. That was one of them. And I know that, like, I do wish I would have known that, like, or been that earlier in my life. And I go, wow, you really do miss a lot when you're not present, because I was, always working and busy and in my head and thinking about things. And, there were times when I don't even have a memory of something that happened that I know happened because I was so not there. Right. Mm-hmm. And so that would be the thing for me.
Be present. Okay. Amazing. Mr. Tunehag.
I should follow up on what Gloria is saying. When I was younger and studied and worked and did double courses at university, ran the radio station and did a few other things and worked, and I was incredibly time conscious, super much into time management, tried to sleep as little as possible, divided in my days into 15-minute segments and all that, and you accomplish a lot. But then I realized, hey, you can't deal with people that way. People need to take time. You can't just say always, you got 15 minutes. No, you give people time. That doesn't mean you're wasting your time in general or careless about time management, but be relational, absolutely. That is very important. And then the second thing, you see some books here, this is not my library, this is my dining room, but I've been reading a lot since I was young. And if I were to go back, I were to say I shouldn't have read as much. Not that it was wrong to reading so much as I did, thousands and thousands of books, but I should have asked people, what should I read? I spent too much time reading books that weren't really good. So I would do that differently. I would make sure I read the classics and all that kind of stuff, but I read a lot of stuff that I probably was just a waste of time.
Yeah, I think that's a part of today's theme is find people, good people around you, mentors, people that can guide and shape you and work with them, learn from them, learn from their mistakes. I agree with that 1,000%. Lastly, Mr. Boyd.
Just shortly, we've by and large here growing up in a performance-driven culture. And that environment sets you up for failure, sets you up to compare yourself with others and sets you up for failure. And I think I lived many of my early years comparing myself and versus being willing to fail or say I'm wrong or I don't have an answer and learning from others. And there's a great book that speaks to this. Maybe you've read, called Falling Upward by Richard Rohr. And it's an excellent book that speaks to these two stages of life where we grow up with an awful lot of structure that creates boundaries or creates sense of safety in place for us. And we're developing our identity. And then there is inevitably a season of suffering or pain or struggle or failure. And if we embrace that, we walk into something that's fresh and new, that's more a real picture of who we are, that isn't about trying to replicate the past, but is looking toward and being willing to take risks and fail. And I think particularly in the business sector, you have to be willing to walk into that.
That's amazing. We're so appreciative of you guys. We're gonna close shortly. I want to take a moment to thank the three of you. You've been so gracious. You were going to speak last year. You've continued on this journey with us. You've shared your wisdom. I know that the group of BAM committee, we've been so excited to get to hear from each one of you. It's been such a pleasure to have you speak and answer our questions today. I also want to take a moment to thank McMedia. We didn't know how we were going to do this conference. I'll be honest with you. We were scrambling. How do you do an online conference for 200 people and make it effective and do breakout rooms? McMedia here is owned by Ben Rumman, and he just said, guys, leave it to me. I will help you get this off the ground. I'll make sure it's organized. We've had Lucy and Christine as production assistants helping. It's a technical and event support company that can bring any meeting to life, and they really have taken the hard work out of this conference. So I ask you to go to them if you need any work done. I also want to thank Dale Leniak. He is the content manager for today. He created and produced all of the videos. Everything that you saw today was done by him, and he donates his time to BAM so that he can be intentional about giving back. If you need any production work done, please, we're going to put their contact information in the chat box, and please use them as a resource. I wanted to thank also the Dirty Apron. A portion of our sales today is going to the Dirty Apron Cooking School. We love the Dirty Apron, close friends with the Dirty Apron. One of our first guest speakers was Sarah Robertson from the Dirty Apron, co-founder, and they are feeding hungry school kids. They have a school meal program. Part of our ticket sales is going to that. And if you would like to donate to that, please, we're going to put their information in the chat box as well. We want to also point out the ACE Development Fund that we partner with on this event. They have $100,000 in matching donation. So if you donate today to the ACE Fund, you can get a tax receipt, and there will be a matching fund to yours, so it will do double the impact. I want to thank Mike and Jennifer Davies, who run the BAM event. A lot of work, months and months go into this. We have a committee, and we meet weekly to make sure that this can be done properly. If you would like to join that committee, please write your name in the chat box, and we will contact you as well. And lastly, I just want to say a big thanks to basically anyone involved with BAM. This is a great global mission where people are going out and making a difference. They're not saying you have to be perfect. They're not saying you have to come in as a Christian. None of that stuff. They say, let's lead by example and let's make a global impact on areas of the world that no one is actually taking the time to worry about. So thank you guys so much for joining us today. We look forward to having you back at a live event a year from now, hopefully, when COVID is under control and passes. 1 year from now, we're going to be hosting a live event, and in 2 months, we're going to be doing another online event with another amazing speaker. Thank you guys so much for joining us. If you have any questions, please put it in the chat box, and we look forward to seeing you at the next event.